Messages from the Senate.
Messages from the Senate. This is the Persell motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, which amendment the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 458, an act relating to health. Persell moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 458 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
Representative Persell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. That is my bill. It was amended. I think everybody's got the handout on that. Section was put in there. I'll read what was inserted. The substantive part. For the purpose of this section, international agency does not include an agency affiliated with a country of the U.S. Department of State, list of state sponsors of terrorism, or the U.S. Department of Treasury list of countries with trade restrictions or sanctions. And we found that agreeable, Mr. Speaker.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to concur, say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 458 as amended by the Senate.
Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll.
Kind of an excuse list. Everybody's here.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 126 ayes and 7 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to.
Message from the Senate. This is the Dordolt motion. Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following House file herewith returned as amended by the Senate, in which amendment the concurrence of the House is respectfully requested. House File 969, an act relating to human services. Dordolt moves that the House concur in the Senate amendment to House File 969 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
Representative Dordolt.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move to concur this with the Senate version. Just the only difference is they added the word "the" 3 times, so it's pretty much identical. Thank you.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion to concur, say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The bill will give the clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House File 969 as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, Representative Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to announce that we should support the new language, and it's good that the Senate had to find 3 meaningless words to accept the Superior House language in all of their parts. So I urge a yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. Clerk will close the roll. There being 134 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to.
Motion for reconsideration. Slocum moves that the vote whereby the House refused to concur in Senate amendments to House File 131 and that the Speaker appointed a conference committee of 3 members be now reconsidered.
Representative Slocum.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to withdraw my request for an appointment of a conference committee. After further examination of the bill, it is not substantially different.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion for reconsideration say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Okay. Representative Slocum, do you want to withdraw your motion to refuse to concur?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only change the Senate made, and it didn't change much, was Senator Westrom added a sentence: this section shall not apply to licensed certified public accountants or licensed attorneys. It doesn't change the intent of the bill at all.
Will you withdraw your motion to refuse to concur?
Excuse me, I would like to withdraw my motion to refuse to concur.
Representative Slocum withdraws her motion to refuse to concur.
Slocum moves that the House concur in the Senate amendments to House File 131 and that the bill be repassed as amended by the Senate.
Any discussion to that motion? All in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The bill clerk will give the bill its third reading as amended by the Senate.
Third reading, House File 131 as amended by the Senate.
Third reading as amended by the Senate. Any further discussion? Representative Slocum.
Mr. Speaker, as I said before, and I'll be very brief, the only change was a Westrom amendment that doesn't change the intent of the bill at all. It just said that the bill does not apply to licensed public accountants or licensed attorneys. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 97 ayes and 37 nays, the bill is repassed as amended by the Senate and its title agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby announce the passage by the Senate of the following Senate file herewith transmitted: Senate File 1006, an act relating to lawful gambling.
First reading of Senate files.
Introduction and first reading of Senate File 1006, an act relating to lawful gambling. Atkins moves that Senate File 1006 and House File 1060, now on the agenda register, be referred to the Chief Clerk for comparison.
Hearing no objection, so ordered. Calendar for the day. The first bill on the calendar for the day is House File 894. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 894, the fourth engrossment, an act relating to elections.
The author of the bill, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This bill, House File 894, is the Omnibus Elections Bill. And before I go any further, I just want to say, as many of you know, we operated the committee this year on a bipartisan basis. Some would say that's a blessing. Some would say that's a curse. I think it's more of a blessing. As many of you know, Governor Dayton's been quite clear that he expects to sign only that election legislation which has bipartisan support. So we took that seriously. And what we did in the Elections Committee this year in every meeting is operate on a bipartisan basis, sometimes holding bills over twice, 3 times, in one case I think even more, so that we could get it right and get it bipartisan. And with a couple of limited exceptions that are not in this bill, by the way, everything that passed out of this committee was bipartisan. And I think that's something for us to be proud of. And so with that, members, I'll just go through the bill and then happy to entertain any questions. One more thing. I want to give some thanks. Thanks to the Vice Chair, Representative Halverson. I want to thank the Republican lead, Representative Sanders, who was great to work with. I want to thank Representative Doubt, the Republican leader, who I think tellingly was on the committee. I think it's the only committee on which he serves, and it was a pleasure to have him. He was always fair, firm in his principles, but fair, as was Representative Sanders. I want to thank Jim Geldman, the committee administrator, and I want to thank Bryn House from DFL Research, Joe Marble from Republican Research, And I want to thank, Joe Marble from Republican Research and Matt Gehring from House Nonpartisan staff as well. To the bill. Article 1 has to do with absentee voting. As many of you know, this is the so-called no excuses absentee voting provision. There are guardrails and limitations in place. We can certainly have a discussion about the merits, but I think you know what the bill basically does. Article 2 has to do with election administration. There are several members' bills in here. Representative Roger Erickson had the bill on expanding township vote by mail in Minnesota. Representative Beard has the bill in here that changes the recount threshold status for statewide elections only, not for our races and legislative elections, but for statewide races only. It would go from 0.5% to 0.25% for a free state-run election recount. There's also a bill by Representative Rosenthal, which is a small tweak to district boundaries for Districts 49 and 49B. That's also in the Senate bill. It's not controversial. Representative Halverson had a county administrative bill in here, and then we have a modified version of Representative Kiefer's House File 269, which has to do with vouching. And this is maybe a point for me to pause and tell you that when I say that the bill is bipartisan, I mean that there's not only things that all parties liked in here, there's some things that folks don't like. And this is an example of an item that some Democrats were not wild about, but we were willing to put it in here, and that is a limitation on the numbers of people that others can vouch for. Right now in present law it's 15, and this moves it to 8. That was one example of a concession that I think rounds out the partisan nature of the bill. So that's Article 2 of the bill, which is about election procedures. Article 3 of the bill has to do with loss and restoration of voting rights. This was primarily House File 637 from Representative Halverson, but I should note that the nearly identical bill was carried last year by Representative Mike Benson. And this grew out of the Election Integrity Task Force, which included 4 legislators, one from each of the major caucuses, and some other notable stakeholders throughout the community and throughout Minnesota, actually. And this is the sum and substance of their recommendations on reducing and, we hope, eliminating the instances of felons voting accidentally or otherwise. And this, too, has bipartisan support, and I'll be deferring to Representative Halverson with questions or comments or concerns about that particular portion of the bill. Article 4 of the bill has to do with electronic rosters or electronic poll books. Representative Lane was one of the point people on that, and there were members from both caucuses who participated in that. There was a working group throughout the session. It included Senator Kiffmeyer over in the Senate, Senator Bonoff, and others, trying to see whether we can really make this electronic poll book option work. Is it a viable solution in the future? And so in this bill is an authorized poll book pilot project that would choose some select jurisdictions throughout the state, both in urban, suburban, and in greater Minnesota areas, to sort of put this technology through the paces and see if maybe this is a possible solution for the future. So that's Article 4 on electronic rosters. Article 5 of the bill has to do with vacancies in nomination. This basically includes 2 bills. One is on nonpartisan vacancy and nomination. Representative Norton had that bill, and then Representative Sanders carried what I think is a groundbreaking bill on partisan vacancies and nomination. One way to think about it is sort of the Wellstone situation. What happens if a major party candidate for an office dies or is incapacitated in some way just before an election or within a reasonably close to an election? What do you do? And because of some changes in federal law, we in turn had to change the way we provided for that scenario in Minnesota law, and we've done that here through Representative Sanders' bill. So those are those 2 provisions. Article 6 of the bill is a perennial favorite. This is a cluster of bills. We usually have anywhere from 2 to 4 to 6 or a large handful of these a year. These are individual counties that are coming to us for legislative permission to make a particular position, in this case an auditor and treasurer position, go from an elected position to an appointed position, and we have a number of those bills from members of both caucuses in that Article 6 as well. And then finally, Article 7 will shortly, I think, be moot because I'll have an amendment to take this out because one of the standalone bills we're hearing today is on national popular vote. It's a very important bill and important enough to deserve its own standalone status and not be part of the Omnibus bill. So with that, members, that is the bill. I know that there are amendments at the desk, and now or later I'm happy to address any concerns or ask any questions or answer any questions.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Simon moving to amend House File 894, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A55.
Representative Simon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is this the A55 Amendment? Okay. Members, A55 is a technical amendment. These are some things that escaped notice from a technical nature from the time that it left the committee or its last committee stop to its time on the floor right now. There are really three parts, lines 1.2 to 1.14. Like other sections already included in the bill, just standardizes the wording of a ballot question. That's something that was already agreed to. We thought we had put it in the bill, and apparently we hadn't. So that's there. The second portion is lines 1.15 to 1.19, and this just clarifies the legislative intent of Article 2, Sections 20 and 21, that only 3 election judges are required in state general elections in precincts with fewer than 500 voters. There was some confusion about the effect of the language. There's no confusion now, or there shouldn't be. We're just being explicit about what everyone assumed was already the case. And the third provision, technical provision, is line 1.20. This just standardizes the timelines for partisan and nonpartisan vacancies. As I mentioned before, there were 2 bills on vacancies, one in partisan races, one in nonpartisan. This just harmonizes those dates. There was no reason to make them separate. So now they're both measured as of 79 days from the election. That's all the amendment does, and I know of no controversy. I ask for your support.
Any discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. The clerk will report the next amendment.
Moving to amend House File 894, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A56.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This just deletes Article 7 of the bill, since we'll be hearing it as a standalone bill later today. It was important enough to deserve consideration on its own. I ask for your support.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson B. moving to amend House File 894, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A46.
Representative Johnson.
Members, Mr. Speaker, this amendment takes out the language for all the special legislation we have for different counties to remove elected officials and make them appointed. Myself, I'm a strong believer that these positions were put into law because those positions represent the voters and are responsible to the voters. Over time, we've had a number of these come up. In fact, in my own county a few years ago, instead of coming down for special session, they did what's in the current law at this time. They had an election. They removed the recorder from elected to appointed. This was done by the voters. They also combined the auditor treasurers and made it one position. Again, it was done by the voters. These people are responsible to the voters and should stay that way. I believe that the right people they should be responsible to is the voters and not the commissioners of the county. I've had some talk with other members, and I will be withdrawing this amendment.
Representative Johnson withdraws his amendment. There's another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Detmer moving to amend House File 894, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A48.
Representative Detmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker and House members. 848 amendment fixes a redistricting problem that eliminated 12 people from the Stillwater Township precinct. This amendment was proposed because the court-ordered boundaries ended up splitting up 2 census blocks which contained 12 people from Stillwater Township into a different House district. In other words, all the Stillwater Township except for 12 people were split up and put into that normally it would be in 39A, now 12 of them are in 39B. In effect, my amendment would ensure that everybody in Stillwater Township would be voting in the same district, same precinct. So I hope that this will be a friendly amendment, and please accept this as a friendly amendment. Thank you.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I accept and hope you vote for Representative Detmer's amendment. Please vote yes.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Johnson B. moving to amend House File 894, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A51.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, this amendment deals with a situation that's happened not once but twice in my district. I live on a border district with Wisconsin. It deals with residency requirements for offices such as county commissioners, city council, school board. I feel that when somebody runs for these offices, they should be a member of their community. They should at least be a member of their state. Not once but twice, a person who's actually a resident of Wisconsin has run for county commissioner in two different commissioner districts in one of the counties I represent. He doesn't live here. He pays his filing fee, and he doesn't have to move into the district or even into the state of Minnesota until 30 days before the general election, which is the only requirement by our state constitution. What this amendment does is requires if he's going to run for office, he actually, instead of just paying his filing fee, has to run a petition, get petition signed. He actually has to spend time in our state or in the district talking to the people that he wants to represent, learning their issues. This requires that he lives at least 1 year in the state of Minnesota, just like we have to. Live 6 months in your district, just like we have to for the people that we represent. Or 30 days before the filing fee begins. It's no different than what we have to do. I think if they're going to represent the people at the local level, they should have to have the same issues that we have. If they want to run, all they have to do is go get petitions signed, and they don't have to run in the primary. Members, I do ask for your support on this amendment.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Johnson, thank you for bringing this forward. As you and I discussed just before today's floor session, I think because this bill perhaps does some things, does good things, I support it and I will vote for it as a standalone bill. But because there's some others that probably wish to be heard on this, in fairness, I would ask that you withdraw it, and you have my commitment here today that it'll be one of the first, maybe even the first bill that we hear next year, and I will support it. I will vote for it. But I think it probably has to be heard just a little bit further because some of the other issues that might crop up with respect to the bill, not just counties but other jurisdictions. And I know you and I discussed before, but I would ask respectfully that you withdraw it, and you have my commitment to hear it and pass it.
The member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Madam Speaker, Representative Simon, I feel this is important enough that this does need to go on now, and I do ask for a roll call.
Representative Johnson requests a roll call. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, it's certainly you're right, Representative Johnson, for you to move forward on your amendment. Regrettably, members, I would ask that you vote no, not on the substance, and I hope this isn't taken in any future context as a vote on the substance, but because, and it's my own failing perhaps for not realizing it until too late, because I think there are some other questions that others want to answer from other units of government, not just counties, but from other local units of government, school boards or cities and the like. I would respectfully ask that we vote no today, but I want no one to interpret that as a commentary on the substance because I plan to hear this bill next year and vote for it. So I respectfully and somewhat awkwardly urge a no vote.
The member from Anoka, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members, and thank you, Representative Simon, for your willingness to continue to discuss this issue. I suspect if this issue goes down, I would hope that your offer stands to, again, next session revisit this issue because I think that this is a critically important issue that's a loophole maybe in our that we deal with, and Representative Johnson has had this happen a couple times in his district. What this language does here is it conforms to state statutes that we are governed by as state representatives and the residency requirements that we hold here. I think that it's common sense, and I think that you should have to meet those residency requirements in order to represent the constituents that live in those jurisdictions, in those districts. So I guess Representative Johnson will have the final word on whether or not we vote on this amendment here today, but I do think that it is something that we need to discuss, and that we, if this doesn't go on in this bill here today, that we will take it up next session.
Representative Johnson.
Members, I do ask that you do vote for this amendment. I do feel it's important. I don't think that, or I don't believe that somebody from another state should run for an office or any office in our state who doesn't live here. They need to know what the issues are. Representative Simon has been honest with me and been very good to work with, so I will withdraw the roll call.
Representative Johnson withdraws his request for a roll call. Further discussion to the amendment. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. No. The motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an... Somebody say Madam Speaker, or did somebody say division? A division having been requested, all those in favor of the amendment, please say, or please stand.
You got to be at your desk. You have to be at your desk.
All those opposed, please stand. There being 52 ayes and 72 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Halverson moving to amend House File 894, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A54.
The member from Dakota, Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This amendment comes out of a discussion that was held during a committee hearing and answers some questions that Representative Holberg brought forward about data practices. And it seeks to simplify the language, clarify the language so that data that is private in one entity it remains private in another entity if it is shared, and just removes any reclassification of data. And I'm happy to take any questions.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support the amendment. Please vote yes.
Discussion. Seeing no further discussion to the amendment, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Ward J.A. moving to amend House File 894, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A57.
The member from Washington, Representative Ward.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. We did actually vote on this and passed this amendment or this bill several weeks ago, and we're just putting it on this bill as an amendment to conform with the Senate omnibus bill, and I ask for your vote.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I support the amendment. Please vote yes.
Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Halverson moving to amend the House File 894, the fourth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 82.
Representative Halverson. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this amendment is also the product of some bipartisan work that has been going on, and I want to thank Representative O'Driscoll for working diligently on this amendment with me. I know there's an amendment to the amendment, but I will just give you a very brief overview that this is part of the Election Integrity Task Force recommendations. All the Election Integrity Task Force recommendations that are in this bill are recommendations that the bipartisan task force agreed to unanimously. Part of that was to redefine and clarify the role of the county attorney in investigating and prosecuting potential voter issues. And this amendment just brings forward more clarity in terms of what the actions are that are expected and what potential penalties could be if there is a failure to perform their duties. And I know there's an amendment to the amendment.
There's an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
O'Driscoll moving to amend the Halverson amendment as follows. The amendment is coded 91.
The member from Stearns, Representative O'Driscoll.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, as Representative Halverson has indicated, this has come through the bipartisan task force. Also, we have a provision in state statute right now that says if there is voter fraud or there are election-related questions, those would be submitted to the county attorney who, and this is the important word, would conduct an investigation. The way our system is set up in the state of Minnesota is there is not an investigatory section within the county attorney's office, and so it further says after they do an investigation that they don't have the capacity to do, that they would then begin to prosecute this. Not all that long ago, we probably read in the newspaper that there was a situation under this statute that a person who did not meet the legal definition of being able to vote ended up voting, and unfortunately the county attorney had to go out and prosecute because that's what the statute says. What the ongoing work and now the amendment to the amendment will do is it will say that at the time that an impropriety has been detected, it will be referred to law enforcement. That law enforcement could be the county sheriff's office within the county that a grievance has or situation has transpired. They would then do an investigation, bring it to the county attorney's office, who would then weigh the evidence, as they do in any case, and then determine whether there's enough information or evidence to prosecute. If there is, prosecution and a trial would take place. If not, what we codify in statute is that the public has the right to know why the county attorney chose not to prosecute that, and it requires them to give written public notice and post it in the record why there wasn't a prosecution. And the final thing that we've put in here is we've said that if any of these provisions that I've mentioned above have been violated, the county attorney would be subject to Minnesota Statute 609.43, which is the criminal penalty for elected officials failing to execute their duties as prescribed by law. And so it gets us to be, I think, the ability to be pure in our process, where we take that investigation out of the county attorney's office, but yet we still give them latitude to be able to make the prosecution. And if they have failed to do that, and there is an uprising, if you will, within their county, The voters will have a chance to have their say on the job that the county attorney did on that particular situation. And so I ask members to vote yes. Thank you.
Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would just encourage members to vote yes as well. Representative O'Driscoll and I both worked with outside stakeholders to reach agreement and compromise on this language, and this is a good amendment, so please support it. Thank you.
Discussion. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment to the amendment is adopted. To the amendment as amended. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 894 as amended.
Third reading. Discussion. The member from Hennepin, Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just have a couple of questions for the author. Hang on, my phone is ringing. Representative Simon, I was wondering if you can tell me on the section dealing with the redistricting fix for Edina. That's the area where the nursing home was split in half by the court plan. It was the same mistake that they'd made 10 years ago. We had tried to fix that last year in session, and the governor actually vetoed the bill. And I have his veto letter here, if you'd like it. He said that would have set a bad precedence and a whole host of things. I'm supportive of this section of the bill. It's the right thing to do. I'm just wondering if you've had communications with the governor's office to see if he's changed his heart now that a year later, or where he's at on this. I mean, his veto letter is pretty strong. Hopefully he has changed his mind, but I'm just wondering what kind of conversations you've had with the governor's office on that.
He will yield. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Anderson, no, I don't claim to have had any specific conversation about this provision. And honestly, I've really sort of deferred to the members who represent that area, notably Representative Rosenthal, and obviously his counterpart in the Senate. So no, I can't claim to have talked about this particular provision.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With Representative Simon, if you need help with the governor on getting that provision in particular passed, I'm more than happy to help you out on that. I would also wanted to ask you a couple of questions on the mail-in balloting portion of your bill. And if we can just kind of go over that a little bit. In the bill, what you are doing, please have those passed out. In the bill, what you've got on here is you're changing it so that a town of any size can do mail-in balloting. And you're also increasing the threshold. It used to be at 50 people, and now it's going up to 100. Can you just talk to me a little bit more about that piece?
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Anderson. Yes, thank you for the invitation on that. So this provision does, as you rightly said, talk about two separate things. And some people don't know that already in Minnesota, 46,000 of our fellow citizens already vote in jurisdictions that don't have polling places. They vote only by mail. Some of your constituents, no doubt, are in that situation. And right now, there are a couple different ways in which a jurisdiction could qualify, as you rightly pointed out. One is if it's a jurisdiction of 400 or fewer people, it's optional, always optional. No jurisdiction has to do this. But a jurisdiction of 400 or fewer people, either a city or a township, and if it's a township, it has to be in greater Minnesota, they can qualify to do, if they want, a mail-in ballot system. And we upped the cap, but here's what's interesting, Representative Anderson, and I didn't know this until this bill came up. The word town in the bill is a term of art that means only townships. It doesn't mean cities. So statutorily, which I wasn't aware of, we refer to them by the name town, but that term means township. So practically speaking, what the bill has done is two things, as you alluded to. One, it lifts the cap on townships, but only outside of the metro area. And that's important. It's not within the metro area, 7-county metro area. Outside of the metro area, a township of a larger size can now choose, if it wishes, to go mail ballot only. And then as to the precinct, you're right. We also went from a size of 50 per precinct to 100 for precincts that would otherwise qualify to do the same. And the up-to-date information that I am told about from the Secretary of State's office is that would only affect 7 precincts in the state of Minnesota that could, if they wish to, opt in for this new sort of regime of voting. So it would only affect 7 precincts. I don't even know where all the precincts are, but I hope that partially or mostly addresses your questions.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Simon. On that provision in particular, and going from the 50 to 100, I'm assuming that changes then every election cycle that you have, that they base it on. So a presidential year, obviously you're going to have fewer, but in a non-presidential year when the turnout isn't so good, then it would be adjusted for that. Is that correct?
He will yield. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Anderson. I'm not sure I followed the question. You're asking whether the number is adjustable? Was that your question, based on the election year?
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Simon. Well, and maybe they aren't. I guess I'm making the assumption that every election cycle, they look at the precincts that have 100 registered voters or fewer, but do they adjust it, or once you're deemed to have that precinct that's 100 registered voters or fewer, are you kind of grandfathered in so that even in a presidential year when their turnout maybe is higher, are you still then grandfathered in, and then that precinct has their balloting done by mail-in even though they're beyond the 100 threshold?
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Anderson, no precinct would be grandfathered in. It's all based on registered voters, and if for some reason the threshold changed for a particular jurisdiction, a particular election, they would lose that eligibility. So there's no grandfathering. Representative
Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Simon, I have also a question for you, if you would yield, for Article 5, Section 7. And it's talking about the Secretary of State, that we would just reimburse them for their costs. How do we know kind of a ballpark figure? Was that discussed in committee? Do you have a ballpark figure of how much would come out of the general fund then to reimburse the Secretary of State for these costs? And how does that get recorded in our whole financial picture here with our budget targets and everything else?
He will yield. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Anderson. This is a tricky issue. It's not part of this bill, obviously, but it's a relevant question. Came up in the context of the state government finance bill, and then we had a discussion, as you may recall, in Ways and Means. This is accounted for, I know that, by the Secretary of State's office, and they do keep the account, and we're able on a periodic basis to go back and ask them about that. There's no it's pretty narrow accounting, is my understanding. I don't remember the details from the state government finance bill, but that money is accounted for. It's not part of this bill, but obviously a related bill where the costs are.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Simon, I just have one last question, and this is dealing with the section on if a gubernatorial candidate has to withdraw either due to death or significant illness, and then the special election for that office doesn't happen until February, as I understand it. Can you kind of walk me through that piece a little bit more and tell me what truly is happening here? Are we going to be in a situation that we're without a governor in a budget year in the month of January and parts of February?
Representative Simon will yield. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Anderson. This is Representative Sanders' bill, and just by way of background, I probably should have mentioned this in the opening remarks. This bill was the outgrowth of a process that included the party chairs of the DFL and Republican Party, as well as other party officers, a lot of stakeholders from the legislature, and this was a bipartisan recommendation. But to your question in particular, no, Minnesota would not be without a governor. And members, this is particularly interesting, I think, for a lot of us who are sort of interested in Minnesota or other political history. One way to think of this provision, the Representative Sanders provision, is kind of the Wellstone situation. What happens when a major party candidate, not the Socialist Workers' Party or the Grassroots Party, with all due respect to them, it has to be a major party candidate. If a major party candidate for office dies, God forbid, in close proximity to the election or is otherwise physically incapacitated, what do we do? Well, we know what we did in 2002, right? When Senator Wellstone's plane went down, we had kind of a hurry-up process on the DFL side with a nominee with about 10 days to go, and the election was held with that new nominee. This would change that. This would change that. So the new rule under this bill, and it was a bipartisan consensus, would be that we would now, in that circumstance, hold a special election 91 days later in early February. So no more Wellstone situation where you'd have Mondale versus Coleman, for example, historically speaking, looking back to 2002. Instead, what would have happened that year, had this been in place, is that election would have been postponed. Not the whole general election, obviously, but for that office, for U.S. Senate, we'd postpone it for 3 months, in essence. So Representative Anderson's question was, what happens in a gubernatorial election? Let's say there's if I could take a little liberty with your question, I think where you're going, Representative Anderson, is what happens if there's an open seat governor's race, for example. Doesn't have to be, but let's say the incumbent governor decides not to run for re-election, so it's an open seat for the governors, and one of the major party candidates, God forbid, dies in October. Under this bill, there would be a special election in February, and I think Representative Anderson's question is, well, what happens? Does the incumbent retiring governor stay on, or are we without a governor and we're going into a budget year and there's all this responsibility? The answer is no. That person would continue to serve, and that does not disturb the current Constitution. Under the Minnesota Constitution, currently, Article 5, Section 4 of the Minnesota Constitution says that the governor shall serve for a term of 4 years or until a successor is chosen. And we've actually had one example of this. In 1962, many of you know, if you know your political history, there was a recount for governor. It was Lieutenant Governor, then Lieutenant Governor Rolvog, the DFL candidate, and the incumbent Elmer Anderson. And there was a recount that lasted, I believe, into April. Governor Elmer Anderson, who was the incumbent, stayed on as governor. He ended up losing that recount to Mr. Rovog, but he stayed on, and that was pursuant to the Constitution. Representative Sanders' bill does not disturb that. So there would be a special. I know that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's important that members understand, no, we would not be without a governor. The incumbent governor, whoever he or she is, would stay on until it was settled.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Simon, just one more question on that piece in particular. So say, for example, it's Governor Dayton. He's running for re-election. The Republican candidate dies, gets an illness, whatever. And so that triggers this special election. So does the governor then, will he stay in place then and do his budget without having been elected for January? Is that the case then?
He will yield. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Representative Anderson, the short answer is yes. The governor would be in place, whether he or she would choose to do a budget or somehow defer to the outcome of the February general election, who's to say. But that governor would stay in place. And as I mentioned, that's exactly what happened with the Anderson-Rovog race. I can't answer as to the budget. I presume, without knowing, that Governor Anderson, though involved in a recount and ultimately losing in 1962, did, I would assume, submit a budget in January. I don't know that for a fact, but I would assume that he did. So it's the same situation that we've had in 1962. So the answer to your question is, yeah, that budget, that governor would stay in and would have the option, certainly, of submitting a budget to the legislature.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Simon. I always appreciate working with you. You are a great legislator. I do have some concerns with this bill, in particular some of those provisions that I just highlighted to you, but we can talk some more offline. Thank you, members.
Discussion to the bill. The member from Meeker, Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. And as a member of the Elections Committee, I'd like to thank Representative Simon for his very efficient and even-handed work on this bill. And I have a question. Would Representative Simon yield?
He will yield. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this is kind of along the lines of what was just being discussed, but a little bit different example. I understand about how it works with vacancies for death or illness. And I ask if there are changes in the reasons for withdrawal or the timing for withdrawal of a candidacy. We are aware that candidates, at least a couple of times in fairly recent memory, have used alleged indiscretions for reasons to withdraw. One specific example that I reference is the candidacy of John Grunseth, who was the Republican candidate for governor in 1990. After some allegations, he withdrew his candidacy on October 30th. This left not much over a week before the election. There were two ways then that he could be replaced by the State Executive Committee of the Republican Party, or the new candidate could be the one second in the primary, which happened to be Arnie Carlson. The State Executive Party did not meet to fill the replacement, and so it fell upon the state to rule that the second place finisher, Arnie Carlson, would become the gubernatorial candidate. How does this, Representative Simon, how does this change that, or does it?
Representative Simon.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Dordolt. The main way that this changes that is, I think the bottom line, the simplest way I can say it is no more dropping out for scandal. And there's some risk in that. It means the parties have to really be careful about who they nominate. We had that instance that you mentioned. We had an instance in recent memory with a former colleague of ours here. And that, from now on, I hope members know in this bill, is out of bounds. So dropping off the ballot because of unflattering press or a scandal, that will no longer be permitted. That person will be on the ballot. The only two ways that a candidate could drop off the ballot are death, obviously, and then serious physical ailment or incapacitation or something along those lines that the bill specifies, but no more dropping out for scandal. So that is a change.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Representative Simon, for getting that on the record before the body. One other, if you would yield.
He will yield. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and this is related to the Grunstedt situation, and just wonder how this would be addressed. In that October 30th issue of 1990, the lieutenant governor candidate, Sharon Clark, along with Mr. Grunstedt, had won the primary. With a vacancy for governor, the contention was that there was no vacancy for lieutenant governor. And in this case, Sharon Clark tried to hold the spot. However, the Secretary of State ruled that the position that she was running for was vacant because they are connected, governor and lieutenant governor. If the governor is gone, the lieutenant governor failed to exist. And the court eventually ruled to remove Sharon Clark from the ballot and replace her with Jonelle Deerstead, who became the lieutenant governor with Governor Carlson. Just wondering, Representative Simon, how this would affect the lieutenant governor position in that situation.
Representative Simon will yield. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Erdahl. The bill specifies that in case a gubernatorial nominee leaves the ballot for whatever lawful reason, then the political party would get to choose who its nominee for governor would be. However, if the vacancy in nomination is because of the lieutenant gubernatorial candidate, who for reasons that are lawful under the statute drops out, then the gubernatorial nominee would choose, not the political party. So the top of the ticket, that individual would choose if his or her lieutenant governor candidate were incapacitated or, God forbid, passed away, that individual would choose. But if it's the gubernatorial nominee, the party chooses.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Representative Simon. Just from a historical perspective, I wanted to get that situation out there and have some idea how it would be addressed in the future.
Discussion to the bill. The member from Anoka, Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And members, this was a unique situation where obviously in all forms of control, the DFL is in control. They have the governorship, the House, the Senate. But I think a very good thing happened, and before session even started, we had the governor saying, you know what, the ground rules that we all play by, the election rules, the election laws that we have, should be broadly bipartisan, should be supported by both sides of the aisle. And I think that's commendable. I think it's very respectable. I think it's the right thing to do. Since before session even started, Chair Simon sat down with myself. We decided, you know what, let's go through a list and let's start talking about things that we can have a discussion on. What are things that we could possibly agree on? What are things that are just non-starters? And I think we did a very good job of coming to a bill that has been very heavily negotiated, that has taken a lot of testimony, and that for the most part has a very strong potential for being a good bipartisan election bill. I think that there are a lot of very good positions in the bill. I think that the electronic poll books, the pilot project that we're doing is an excellent project. I think it's the way of the future. I think it's the right thing to do. I hope that it works. I hope that we find the best technology and the best way to implement that. And I think that our state will be better off for it, not only for accessibility but for integrity measures as well. I think a lot of the technical redistricting measures are crucial and critical. I think many of them should have been signed into law last biennium, but I'm happy that they're in this bill here. I think changing the threshold, Representative Beard's bill, for publicly funded recounts, lowering that threshold is a very good thing, sound fiscal policy for the state of Minnesota. We've talked a little bit about the vacancy and nomination bill this afternoon, and that was my bill, and I was honored to carry it. And like Representative Simon said, it was brought out of meetings with both party chairs and a large number of folks that have interest in making sure that our election laws work effectively and work efficiently. And I think that this solution is the best solution we can have to an imperfect problem. To have a candidate pass away during that time after withdrawal period is awful for whichever side that it happens to, for the family members. It's a terrible, tragic situation, and it puts things in limbo. I think that this bill is the best solution for that. And some of you may say, well, why do we need to wait all the way till February? Why do we need to push out that special election so far? Well, members, we're not allowed under federal law to have a Wellstone, Mondale, Coleman situation again. The federal UOCAVA rules that dictate our absentee balloting process, that dictate how our military and overseas voters vote, have changed. We have to allow them the opportunity to vote. We absolutely owe all of those folks that are serving our nation, whether it be the military, whether it be missionary work, whether it be the Peace Corps, whatever takes you outside of this country, we owe them the right to vote. My brother serves in the United States Air Force. He's a member of the Special Ops, lives in Okinawa, Japan. And aside from living in Okinawa, Japan, where he's stationed right now, he's gone 335 days a year. So for me, the ability to let those members have the opportunity to vote is necessary, is crucial, and is critical that we allow that timeline. That's why it's pushed out until February. That's why it's pushed out to that date certain, that we make sure that all eligible voters have the opportunity to vote. And in my opinion, is one that is owed. Representative Simon, I can't thank you enough for being a man of honor and from negotiating from a point of good faith from the very beginning. And that, again, I can't stress enough that we sat down and said, what can we agree on and how can we move from there? And we have a lot of things that we agree on in this bill. We have a few things that we're still working on. And this bill is going to go to conference committee. And one of the important things to look at when it comes to this side of the aisle and offering up broad bipartisan support is when we look at the Senate positions, my side of the aisle has a lot of cause for concern as to what the bill that could come back from conference committee, what it could look like. It's my hope and I believe that a large number of my caucus could support something very close to this. And I hope that we continue to improve on some of these. And everyone in the committee has been wonderful to work with. I will vote for this bill today. I think that it's got a lot of great policy provisions in it. And I hope that in conference committee, again, we can continue to move through those steps. But if you don't see a lot of my caucus members following in my footstep, it's because they want to make sure that the product that comes back from conference committee is one that can be broadly supported bipartisanly. And again, Chair Simon, I thank you for the work that you've done on this. You've negotiated in good faith. In fact, I think by my count, we probably have more Republican provisions in this bill than DFL provisions. And I think that that's a testimony to your leadership. For that, I thank you, and I will be voting green on this.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, members. I appreciate the time and the discussion and the debate here today. Representative Sanders, thanks to you as well. You've been completely open and completely honest and completely honorable, and I really appreciate that. And I hope we can continue this into the conference committee and into next year. I do understand the Ronald Reagan adage about trust but verify, and I assume that to the extent there's some red votes on the board that it's due to that and not substantive concern about the bill. So I certainly understand that. Those are the rules of the road around here. And I understand some folks may want to do that to be consistent with the governor's pledge to sign an election bill that has bipartisan support. I'm confident that we can get there and that we will get there. And so, members, I thank everyone who's worked on this bill. I thank all the members who have legislation in this bill, and I ask for your support.
The clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 74 ayes and 60 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1112. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 1112 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to business organizations.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, this is a technical cleanup bill related to business services from the Secretary of State's office. It is in competition with a previous bill I passed this session for the least interesting piece of legislation to hit the floor.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Moving to amend House File 1112 as follows. The amendment is coded 616.
The member from Pine, Representative Faust.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is also a very boring amendment. And what this does is there are two sections of law that have co-op law in them. One is 308B and the other one I believe is 308A. 308B was written when co-ops started allowing other investors to be involved with them, such as ethanol plants and things like that. And so they wrote up directors' duties and responsibilities, and they realized that they did not have that same list of responsibilities on the 308A side, and so what this does is it puts those same requirements in law on 308A that we currently have in 308B. So it's very simple and a good amendment for everybody.
Representative Winkler.
Madam Speaker, members, I would recommend a yes vote on the Faust amendment.
Discussion to the amendment. Seeing no discussion to the amendment, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say nay. The motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1112 as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion. Seeing no discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 134 ayes and 0 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 799. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 799, an act relating to elections.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. It's a privilege to be here today to talk to you about House File 799, which is the national popular vote provision. I think most people agree that it's probably not right for the world's greatest democracy to be a place where the second place vote getter could be and sometimes has been President of the United States. And this is not just about Bush v. Gore or avenging some sort of loss in the year 2000. This is about the system. After all, in the year 2004, but for a 50,000 vote switch in the state of Ohio, we would have had President John Kerry, even though he would have lost the popular vote as well. And we have had other misses and near misses in American history. So it's about a fundamental principle of fairness that predates Bush v. Gore or any other recent controversy. And let me tell you, members, a story, a personal story. Those in the Elections Committee have already heard it, so hopefully they'll bear with me. In 1992, I moved for a brief time to Little Rock, Arkansas. I graduated that year from college, and I was supposed to start law school in the fall of 1992, but I deferred starting law school and moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, because I was supporting the candidacy of Bill Clinton for president. So I moved to Little Rock to join the staff at the national headquarters. I drove down there with one of my best friends, packed the car full so you couldn't see out of the rearview mirror. There was no visibility, drove down to Little Rock, Arkansas. And when I drove down to Little Rock in early June of 1992, Governor Bill Clinton was in third place. Not first place, not second place. The polls showed he was in third place. Ross Perot was in first place by quite a bit. The incumbent President George H.W. Bush was in second place, fairly comfortably. And my candidate, Governor Bill Clinton, was in third place. And I remember not long after I arrived in Little Rock going to eat at a local watering hole called Your Mama's. It really is there, and I just looked before I got up here. It's still there if you go to yourmamasgoodfood.com. That's yourmamasgoodfood.com. It's still there. Went to Your Mama's restaurant in downtown Little Rock, just a few blocks away from the campaign headquarters, and I was having lunch with some of my fellow campaign workers in the Clinton campaign. It wasn't yet Clinton-Gore because it was before the convention, in the Clinton campaign. And I remember there was some knee-slapping and high-fiving and cheering going on because polls showed, state by state, that as of that point, no candidate, none of the three, Perot, George Bush, or Clinton, would get 270 electoral votes. None of them. The electorate and the electoral vote would be sufficiently split that no candidate would get the requisite majority, that's 270 electoral votes, to win the presidency outright. So, many of you remember from your civics lessons what happens in that instance. When you have no candidate that gets 270 electoral votes, it's thrown to the U.S. House of Representatives. And at the time, in the summer of 1992, Democrats easily, and by a pretty wide margin, controlled the U.S. House of Representatives. So my fellow campaign workers, some of them at least, who were out there that day at Your Mama's restaurant, they were slapping their knees and they were giving high fives and talking about how great it was that we could even win, we and our candidate could even win being the third place vote getter. And wasn't it great that our candidate might still win because the election would be thrown to the U.S. House of Representatives, where sympathetic Democrats would probably anoint him President of the United States despite his third place showing. I was not slapping my knee or giving high fives that day, and I found that concept offensive, and still do. I believe in the world's greatest democracy, that we owe it to ourselves to make sure that the President of the United States is the number one vote getter, not number two, and certainly not number three. And so my personal interest in this stems in large part from that incident, not any other incident before or since. And it just goes to show that there must be some way for us to remedy the situation. So simply put, what this bill does, and what a number of other states, 9 other states have already done, we would be the 10th, is to enter into a state compact whereby we would agree to award our electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. We would only agree to do that if enough states adding up to 270 electoral votes also agreed to do it.
Members, if you could take your conversations off the House floor into the alcoves or the retiring rooms so members who are on the floor and trying to listen to Representative Simon can hear what he is saying. Thank you. Representative Simon.
So we'd be entering into this state compact, and if enough states adding up to 270 electoral votes, we have 10, of course, others have other numbers, if enough states adding up to 270 join the compact, then the compact would kick in, and those states would then award their electoral votes. Now, a word about the U.S. Constitution, because this is critical, I think, to the debate. The U.S. Constitution says that these things called electoral votes will be created in the Electoral College. But critically, every state has the discretion to award those electoral votes in any fashion it chooses. There is nothing in the Constitution. There is nothing in the minutes of the Constitutional Convention. There is nothing in the Federalist Papers. There is nothing anywhere in American history that anyone's shown me or that I've discovered that says that the founders and the framers intended for states to do as they've done now, which is 48 out of the 50 of them, award them on a winner-take-all basis, where we award the electoral votes on whoever wins our state's contest by even one vote. That is something that has evolved over time, but it is nowhere in the Constitution. So, technically, though absurdly, if Minnesota chose, or any state chose, for example, to award its electoral votes based on, say, who the tallest candidate is, or which candidate has the most letters in his or her last name, as absurd as that would be, we could do that. The Constitution vests in every state the authority to award those electoral votes on whatever basis it chooses. It just so happens that 48 out of the 50 states, with Nebraska and New Hampshire being the exceptions, awards its electoral votes, or in Maine, I should say, Nebraska and Maine, awards its electoral votes based on winner-take-all. And so the Constitution is silent as to how we award those electoral votes. And what other states before us, and hopefully our state and other states after us, are proposing to do is to award our votes based on the winner of the national popular vote. Interstate compacts, by the way, this creature of an interstate compact is a common thing. I know areas that legislators from the Duluth area, for example, are very familiar with the Great Lakes Compact and other compacts which Minnesota enters into from time to time. So it's nothing new. It's nothing particularly novel. And again, this only takes effect if states adding up to 270 electoral votes agree to do the same thing. In other words, Minnesota is not jumping off any sort of cliff by itself, unilaterally, in any form or fashion. It's all or nothing. As I mentioned, it's already passed in 9 states, and it has support from prominent Democrats and Republicans nationwide. If you go to the website, nationalpopularvote.org, you'll see more information about that. But I think it's really important to remember that the Founding Fathers did not anticipate either the way that the Electoral College has played out or the rise of political parties. Remember, there were none at the founding of the nation, and the founders did not anticipate the way that those have evolved today. They contemplated instead that the Electoral College would be made up of wise men who would not be bound by the popular vote, but would simply use it as guidance. And in fact, during the first presidential election in American history, only 4 of the states awarded their electoral votes on a winner-take-all basis. Only 4. So we've talked about how, at least from my standpoint, members, there's a fundamental fairness principle, but there's another principle that I know other members, Representative Garofalo and others, have talked very articulately about, which is not only does it distort a sense of fairness in our current system, in my view, it also distorts presidential election campaigns. I don't need to tell you, and there's a handout on your desk to that effect, that the vast majority of campaign visits, attention, and so forth are on a handful of states. And I think that's harmful and corrosive to our democracy. It's not about Minnesota or other states necessarily getting more attention. It's about making sure that attention is more diffuse and less concentrated on a few specific areas. So you have the safe states of either party not getting visited or not getting the attention, and the states that are battleground states getting virtually all of the attention. And with national popular vote, it will incentivize candidates to campaign all over. If any of us who have run our own campaigns and are probably pretty good amateur political advisors were to advise a Democratic presidential candidate right now, I think 134 of us would, under the current system, tell that candidate to skip Texas. Just skip it. It's not worth your time. It's not worth your time to go to Texas. Sure, you'll get a few votes here and there, but it's not worth your time. Similarly, I think most of us, probably all 134 of us, would currently advise a Republican presidential candidate to not waste a bunch of airtime or candidate time in California. Sure, there are millions and millions of Republicans in California, but you're probably not going to win California. That would change under this system. And one final point about distortions, this is where Representative Garofalo has spoken particularly forcefully, and I hope he'll rise to this point later today. It also distorts policy outcomes. Members, if you happen to be a Democrat who thinks that there ought to be some trimming in the defense budget, for example, then I think you'd be a little bit upset about the fact that there are tanks right now being ordered for the U.S. Army that the U.S. Army doesn't want. Why? Because Ohio wants them. And similarly, if you're a Republican and you thought that President George W. Bush went too far in launching the largest extension of entitlements since the Great Society in the 1960s with Medicare Part D, you might ask yourself why that was done, despite George W. Bush's confessed conservative principles. And the answer, at least in part, is because voters in Florida wanted that. So there are a lot of examples where it distorts policy outcomes as well. Members, if we were to start from scratch today and rewrite the Minnesota Constitution, I'd ask you to consider or ask yourselves whether we would ever start with a system like this. Let's say we did it by county. And all 87 counties were allocated a certain number of Minnesota electoral votes. Well, by that logic, Hennepin County would have about a quarter, almost a quarter. So let's say there were 100 electoral votes. Hennepin County would get 23 or 24 of them. And if you need 50 to get elected, you're almost halfway there just by winning Hennepin. So it doesn't matter that there are a lot of, for example, Republican votes in Plymouth or Eden Prairie or in western Hennepin County or in the Lake Minnetonka area. That would all be nullified by Minneapolis or by other communities that would go the other way. So I don't think any of us would ever counsel doing this in Minneapolis. So to me, members, it all comes back to an issue of fundamental fairness. And I really mean what I said at the beginning of my remarks. As the world's greatest democracy, how can we go around the world, as we've done so many times in our recent history, exporting democracy? How can we go around the world and explain the present system? How can we look into the eyes of an 11-year-old Iraqi girl or an 8-year-old Afghan boy and say, we came here to make you more free. We came here so that you can understand and appreciate the value of free and fair elections. But, oh, by the way, we in the United States have a system where on a number of occasions, and on a number of near misses, but on a number of occasions, the second place vote getter won the presidency of the United States. I don't know how we explain it, but I do know how we can fix it. And we can fix it here cleanly and fairly in a way that doesn't put us out on a limb. We'd be joining with other states, and only as many states as got to 270 electoral votes. We would not be messing with the U.S. Constitution. This is not an amendment to the Constitution. It's working within the current framework, which says that we, the states, are allowed to allocate our electoral votes in any form or fashion that we choose. And it would do it in a way that I think is consistent with principles of fundamental fairness. Maybe that's why in Minnesota and in every other state where I've seen polling, this polls at least 70%. I think people understand that though there are some merits to a winner-take-all system, and there are some interesting, good arguments, that on the whole and on balance, if we can do this in a fair and flexible way that honors that principle of fundamental fairness, as many other states have already done, we can get around that problem of being the world's greatest democracy, but also having a system that often picks the person who's the second place vote getter. This is a product of a lot of people's work around the country. There are over 2,100 state legislators around the country who support this bill, many in this body, obviously, who I hope we'll hear from. I think we'll have an interesting discussion today that's totally untethered to and disconnected from partisan concerns, and thank you very much for your time and attention.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 799.
Third reading. The member from Sibley, Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I just want to compliment Representative Simon on his presentation, and I understand where he's coming from, but I strongly disagree with the premise. When I read our U.S. Constitution, in fact, one other thing about Representative Simon, him and I disagree on a number of issues. In fact, we were about a little over a year ago, we debated the marriage amendment at the University of Minnesota. I found him to be very respectful and articulate and knowledgeable, and I appreciated the exchange. I think we both learned something that day. But just back to this bill, members, when I read the Constitution, I don't see the word democracy in there, okay? And there's a reason for that. We're a constitutional republic, okay? That's a big difference from a democracy versus a constitutional republic. And what I mean by that is this, is that our founding fathers believed that we had to balance the majority against the minorities. And that was a fundamental principle that I've come to understand in the founding of our country. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you do any type of reading, and I'm not a scholar, but I've just read a lot of experts, okay? My problem is I maybe read too much. But there was a big concern that the heavily populated states would take advantage of the lower populated states. And therefore, they set up a form of government nationally that had a House of Representatives and the Senate. So in the House of Representatives, we see California has 40, 50, I'm not even sure, 60 representatives, and North Dakota only has 1. But in the Senate, North Dakota has 2, and California has 2. So it was our colonies could have divided on this, but they came to this compromise. And it has served us well, members, over 200 years. We have been one of the most stable republics in the history of the world. Many other democracies have simply, governments with democracies have simply burned and perished, okay? They don't last because the majority can take advantage of the minority. So we have a system that balances states' rights and smaller population states with more population. And our electoral college was a good example of that. Now, the other thing you have to understand about the national popular vote, everything that's claimed today by the people who support the national popular vote is based on theory, okay? There is no fact. We haven't had the national popular vote for 200 years. So they can make all these claims that it's going to solve all these problems, but it's based on theory. And this is a big change, members. We're talking about how we elect our president. And I do agree with Representative Simon, this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. It can go either way. But our founding fathers would fully expect that occasionally you would elect a president without the majority of the votes, okay? They would expect that because they set up a system of balance between the high population states and the low population states. The other thing I would point you to, members, is the Cato Institute had an analysis done of the national popular vote and which states would gain in influence and which would lose in influence. And states like New York, Michigan, Pennsylvania would have huge gains in terms of their influence on the population of the presidency. States like South and North Dakota, Vermont, and Rhode Island would have huge losses on their influence on the presidency. So again, we're undermining that basic principle that our country was founded on of the balance between the more populated states versus the less populated states. Now, in this analysis from the Cato Institute, Minnesota's influence actually decreases under the national popular vote. So our influence on the presidential election will be less, not more, if we go to an MPV. Now, the other side says, well, you still have the electoral college. That's true, but it's in name only. You basically gut the system because in the end, the president is elected, whoever gets the most votes. Other concerns of those who oppose the national popular vote, if it comes into fruition, there will be legal or lawsuits against it. I'm not a lawyer. I've simply read some of the lawyers who will file constitutional lawsuits against this and forcing other states to join a compact, not with their free will, but because a number of other states actually passed it. So there's constitutional problems. The whole idea that we are a democracy is a false thing from a historical standpoint. And I'll give one more analysis, members. If we were some people refer to as a mob democracy, whoever has the most votes wins, then think about this illustration. Let's say there were about a dozen of us, and we happened to observe a robbery where the thief actually killed the store owner, okay? And as the thief ran from the scene after killing the store owner, we chased after him, all 12 of us. We caught him, and 10 of us said, you know what? We've seen that this person killed this person and robbed that store. Let's execute him. So 10 voted to execute. 2 said, wait a minute. He has certain constitutional rights. We cannot exercise our execution of him, even though we know he's guilty, because under our republic, he has certain constitutional rights to be tried before his peers and a jury. Well, under a mob democracy, the 10 would be right and the 2 would be wrong. But under a constitutional republic, you have creator-given rights that the majority cannot take away from you. And one of those is a trial by jury. So, members, whether you're for or against this, I don't think we should just rush it through in a short period of time. I think it needs to be vetted with people on both sides of the issue, because you're working and affecting one of the cornerstones of our republic. And think about this, members. We've been a republic that has a motto, e pluribus unum, out of many one. What does that mean? That means out of many different nations and ethnic backgrounds, we became one nation. Now, why can people live in this country, for the most part, peacefully from different backgrounds, and yet we see in other countries you'll have the same backgrounds and they'll be killing each other, members? Why is that? Because we're a republic with creator or God-given rights. 49 out of our 50 states acknowledge Creator, God, or Lord as the author of our civil and religious liberties. Look it up, do your research. 49 out of 50 states acknowledge God, Creator, or Lord as the author of our civil and religious liberties. Our own preamble of the Constitution says, we, the people of the state of Minnesota, grateful to God for our civil and religious liberties and desiring to perpetuate its blessings. I'll leave the rest off. I've got it memorized. So, members, one other thing. If you look in the cornerstone of this building, okay, you know what book they put in the cornerstone of this Capitol when they built it? The Bible, okay? Not because they believe that we should all be Christians, but they wanted you to realize that your civil and religious liberties are inalienable, and man should not be able to take them away from you because they're God-given rights, because you're a human being. And therefore you have rights that a king or people sitting on a bench with a black robe should not be able to take away from you. So, members, in closing, we're not a democracy. We're not a mob democracy. We're a republic. And before we make this sudden change, I'd encourage you to think carefully about it and to defeat this, and let's have more discussion with it in the future, because it's a critical foundational issue. Thank you for your time. And remember, everything the NPV claims is going to be solved is all based on theory. They have no 200-year history of repeatable, observable facts. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The member from Hennepin, Representative Winkler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I find myself in a somewhat awkward position in agreeing with Representative Gruenhagen on his conclusion and disagreeing with Representative Simon. And Representative Gruenhagen, I would have found it easier if you hadn't just given that speech. And Representative Simon, you know, we talked about this in committee, and members, this is kind of one of the few blood feuds in St. Louis Park. National popular vote and ranked choice voting are the two. And I guess I maybe was a little over the top in threatening in committee that there would be blood if this continued forward. And so there won't be blood here today, but I don't support your bill. For a number of reasons, none of which I think were listed in Representative Gruenhagen's speech. The first concern I have, and you can make a strong indictment of the Electoral College, and we can have a debate about that. I could go either way, frankly. I think there are some concerns about a national recount determining an election and doing that at a population of 300 million as opposed to a state-by-state recount, which is much more manageable if a state recount is necessary. But even if you agree that the Electoral College is a relic of the past, and Representative Gruenhagen, the intention of the founders is not the intention of today, and I think you could probably go through a long list of things that they believe that we no longer believe, and we think we're smarter about it than they were at the time. But even if you think the Electoral College is a bad idea, national popular vote isn't necessarily a great solution. And for me, the simple and easiest reason is that even if we pass national vote, enough states do it, we still have the Electoral College, and electors will still be set from Minnesota to vote in this selection of the president. And in the event that the candidate supported nationally is not Minnesota's candidate, Minnesotans will be represented at the Electoral College by electors supporting a candidate that Minnesotans didn't vote for. So the person who, and let's just be honest, Minnesota hasn't gone Republican since 1972. So I guess this is a message more for Democratic members. But if, as is traditionally the case, Minnesota votes Democrat for president and a Republican wins the national election, Minnesota's electors will be sent to wherever they go. I presume it's Washington. I don't know. Maybe it's an undisclosed location. Wherever they go, and they cast St. Paul. They cast their. They get. They will go to St. Paul and cast their votes for the candidate who didn't win Minnesota. And to me, that's one of the real downsides of this national popular vote solution. The straightforward approach is to pass a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Electoral College if you think it is such a pernicious influence in our democracy. But the national popular vote method, I think, complicates the election system, and it ends up putting Minnesota potentially, and certainly in the last, not the last two, but the previous two elections, in the position of casting ballots for George W. Bush instead of John Kerry or Al Gore, respectively. And I do think there is something, and this is maybe where we will agree, Representative Gruenhagen, I think there is a little bit of something to the federalist system that we have in which elections are conducted on a state-by-state basis. So members, Representative Simon is a great guy. He rarely has an error in judgment. If you feel like you need to throw him a vote just because he's such a great guy, I'd say go for it. But for my money, I'd say that this is an idea that we should not be supporting.
The member from Dakota, Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And no surprise, I rise in disagreement with Representative Winkler on his position on this issue. Members, the first thing you have to ask yourself is the current system broken? And I don't think any objective analysis of the current system can defend it and reach any other conclusion that it is, in fact, broken. From a public policy standpoint, from a political standpoint, the fact of the matter is the current system is an Ohio-first system. It's a great deal for Ohio, it's a great deal for Florida, but Minnesota gets screwed. And the fact of the matter is the vast majority of the country is in our boat. We have 6, 7, maybe 8 states which have disproportional political power. The current system is an Ohio-first system. And so that's the first recognition, first question, do you think the current system is broken? The answer is yes. So this solution, the national popular vote solution, has a simple premise. It says the candidate who gets the most votes should win. Now, Representative Winkler's brought forward another idea he thinks is a better idea. That's to abolish the Electoral College. I'm against that. That's a bad idea. That takes away our constitutional rights as a state, our sovereign rights as a state, specifically enumerated in the Constitution to determine how our electoral votes are allocated. So if this bill did that, if it abolished the Electoral College, I'd be the first person to get up and oppose it. It doesn't do it. As Representative Simon has mentioned previously, if we as a state decided we wanted to give our electors to the candidate who has the longest last name or is the tallest person, we absolutely have that constitutional right. This bill preserves our rights as a state to implement that plan. We've heard some other analogies before about mob democracy and killing people. I don't really know where to go with that one. The premise of this bill is that the candidate who gets the most votes wins. Now, members, there's been some different analysis, and privately people have talked about the concerns they have about who is supporting this bill. So for those members on the Republican side of the aisle who are worried that maybe, you know, someone like Nancy Pelosi called Governor Dayton a couple weeks ago or something, which, by the way, Nancy Pelosi, get off my side. You're not helping us get votes for this matter. The fact of the matter is you're going to have those who you politically disagree with on both sides of the issue. You've got Nancy Pelosi who's in favor of it. You've got Representative Winkler who's opposed to it. Do not base your judgment on who is supporting or opposing the bill. Simply look at the facts. Right now in the current process, other states have disproportional influence in our federal process, and it distorts national federal policy. Look at No Child Left Behind. Multiple references in the briefings of those papers to soccer moms in Florida. Look at the Medicare prescription drug benefit, focused on Florida and Ohio. Presidents run for re-election, and those states have a disproportional influence in the process, which results in bigger government and more spending in attempting to sway those votes. When President Obama announced his stimulus plan, alleged stimulus plan to get the economy moving, where did he go? Did he go to the place with the highest rate of unemployment? No, he went to the swing state of Colorado. So even when they're designing economic policies that are supposed to benefit the nation, they're focusing in specifically on narrow areas. And so, members, I'm sure we'll have a thorough debate. When I was a kid, I remember I was a big fan of pro wrestling. And, you know, they'd have the good guys that would fight the bad guys. But on occasion, very rarely, they had the best wrestling matches. They would have two bad guys go out and fight each other at the same time. And so I'm looking forward to Representative Winkler and some other Democrats maybe mixing it up here. And who knows, maybe me and some other Republicans on this side of the aisle will exchange in some give and take on the further questions going forward. The last point I would make is that 2 points. Number one, this issue of small states and large states. Folks, the small states get the short end of the stick right now. All the small states are flyover states that get no attention, whether it's in the upper Midwest, with the possible exception of New Hampshire, every state which gets 3 electoral votes, which is the minimum, does not get a fair shake in the current process, no presidential attention. And the final point I would make is that in terms of the founders, focusing on what the founders were focusing on, the entire problem with the Electoral College right now is the winner-take-all system. If we applied that model to your legislative district, to the state of Minnesota, or to any congressional district, breaking it down on a county or city basis, it would be a disaster. The Electoral College is, rhetorically speaking, a ticking time bomb as it is existing in its existing design and implementation. The winner-take-all mechanism is the linchpin that is causing these problems. The National Popular Vote Plan is a good bill, has bipartisan support, and I would encourage members on both sides of the aisle to vote yes on Representative Simon's bill.
The member from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. Well, I hope that members are listening. I really hope that members are listening. And I know this is one of those debates that can go on for a long time and people start chatting and they have other business to attend to. This is very, very important. And Representative Winkler somewhat stole part of my speech, and it was going to start by saying that I agreed with a lot of what Representative Gruenhagen said. Members, I don't disagree with Representative Simon that there are some problems with the Electoral College. But to say that there are problems and that it's not a perfect system is not to say that this is the solution. I have a great deal of concern about this as a solution to the problems that we all know are in the Electoral College. I mean, every time we have a presidential campaign, a presidential election, who here doesn't say, what a crazy system we have? Of course, it doesn't feel intuitive that we elect our president through an Electoral College and not through a direct democracy. Of course, that doesn't feel natural. But our election system is not scalable. The country is not just a big version of my legislative district. We are 50 states. We have a different constitutional system, as Representative Gruenhagen was talking about. And I have some real concerns and questions about how this thing would work. And my feeling about it is not only that it hasn't been vetted enough, and I really seriously feel that it hasn't, although a lot of lobbying has been done on this issue. A lot of members on the floor are saying, I don't know enough about this, what should I do? And those very questions should tell us this is not ready to pass this body. We don't know enough about it. Representative Garofalo referenced the polls on this. I think that's who mentioned that something like 70% of people are for this. If you think about that for a second, where has the lobbying been on this issue? I don't know who is funding this issue, but I do know there's a lot of funding here. There's a lot of money being spent to promote this idea, and all of that lobbying is on one side. And I have never heard from any organized lobbying effort on the other side. In fact, I think those of us on the floor today who are opposed have never even talked to each other about it for the most part. There has been no organized opposition to this effort, and so the questions that need to be answered really have not been answered. I'm not sure the questions have even been asked. And that is a real problem. And just to give you an example, and Representative Winkler touched on this, but here are a couple of mine. This effort requires a certain number of states. Once those certain number of states have passed it, you're kind of all holding hands and jumping in together. And so that being the mechanism for this, what happens if you get to the point where a state is supposed to throw in its electoral votes and it says, we don't like this, we're not going to do it? At that point, how does it get enforced? Well, I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that question. I don't know if at that point the Supreme Court would have jurisdiction, would jump in and decide that quickly enough to have an expeditious outcome to an election. So this could throw an election into great uncertainty. Another problem that could come up is the recount problem that other members have alluded to. We know that every state has a different system for elections. We just passed an election bill off this floor that details a lot of things that Minnesota is going to do that other states may or may not do. And so if we say that we're going to throw in our electoral votes based on the popular vote outcome, we are basically giving up our sovereignty and our election system to the systems of other states. Well, some of those other states might have systems that we don't agree with. There may be a serious recount problem in another state, and yet that state may decide that they may count it in a way that we don't agree with, and that is going to bind us, should we actually be bound, to turn over our electoral votes to these other states' count systems. And these are problems that may be fixable, but I don't think they've been fixed. I don't think this is ready for prime time. I also want to say a word about this issue about attention and who gets the attention in elections, because I know I've gotten some emails from my constituents about this very issue. But we know that now people get their information in very different ways. People mainly use the internet, or at least people under a certain age use the internet for a lot of their information, and I don't think the problem in presidential elections is that we don't have enough information. I don't think we need to have a presidential candidate come to our state to know about that presidential candidate's positions. There are lots and lots of ways that people get that information. And yet we do know that this would change the way elections are conducted in ways that are very hard to predict. We've heard different views of that already today on the House floor. So I would simply suggest to you that is another unknown that we would be injecting into our system if we and other states were to pass this bill. So members, I urge you to vote no. If you have any concern about how this will work, don't do it based on who's for it. I think and I thank Representative Garofalo for actually, I think he may help some of our members vote no, frankly. But if you have concern about how this is going to work, Don't just vote yes to go along. This is way too important for that. Way too important. This has not been properly vetted. The fact that a lot of money has been spent to lobby it does not mean that it's been properly discussed and vetted in this legislature. It has not. So please, members, voting this down today does not mean that it can never come back. It will not mean that it can't be done in a future year. There is no urgency around this, and I urge you to vote no on this bill.
The member from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Gavel. I think we're having a class of 2004 debate here with folks, and the Speaker will moderate it. Representative Simon, I have a question on the bill, and I'm looking on page 2, and I'm trying to understand how this would actually work on the allocation if Minnesota, trying to get to the point that Representative Liebling and Representative Winkler were mentioning, in the event of a tie, and if you've got to get the bill, I'll wait just a moment. It looks like on 2.11, 2.12 et al., and it talks about in the event of a tie for the winner, the presidential elector certifying official member of each state shall certify the appointment of an elector slate nominated. And then it goes on, if any reason the number of electors nominated in the member association is less or greater than the state's number of electoral votes, the presidential candidate on the presidential slate that has been designated shall have the power to nominate presidential electors for that state, and the state's elector certifying official shall certify the appointment of those nominees. Is that different than what we have now? It seems to be putting, if Representative Simon will yield.
He will yield.
If that is putting an inordinate amount of authority to replace electors because of the compact that electors could be selected based on the vote in the state, but if the outcome of the national popular vote is different, that the winning presidential elector or candidate would then have the power to replace electors. Am I reading that correctly?
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and Representative Hansen. I'm sorry, I was just trying to get my hands on the updated copy of the bill. Could you just point me to the language just one more time?
Representative Hansen.
I think I understand the question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Simon. It'd be starting on 2.11 and going to 2.20. And it appears it provides the presidential candidate with the power to replace electors that are duly elected by the people of the state or selected by the people of the state.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and Representative Hansen. I understand the question. No, what that provision is meant to say, and does say, is that if there is a tie in the national popular vote, literally a tie, imagine how remote a possibility that is, but I suppose it could mathematically happen. If there is an exact tie in the national popular vote, then we would go to something more approaching the current system, where the winner of the state would decide that state's electoral votes. If there was an absolute tie, that's what would happen.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and if Representative Simon would continue to yield. So if there is determining the absolute tie, is there a national recount? If we are within that, is every state going to have to do a recount based on the recount procedures of each state, or is there a national recount to determine if we're at an exact tie?
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Representative Hansen, Madam Speaker, and Representative Hansen. That's a critical point. I'm glad you raised it. This state and every state that signs this compact would not in any way relinquish or surrender any sovereign power when it comes to counting our own elections. There is no national ballot counting authority now. There never has been, to my knowledge. That wouldn't change at all. There would be no mandated national recount of any kind, but individual states, as the case may be, and we've seen most recently with Florida in 2000, where it came down to 537 votes, states could then, on their own motion, I suppose, or if someone else, I suppose, wanted to pay for it, that could always happen. But it's always at the state level. It's always the state's top election official. In our case, the Secretary of State would be in charge of that, and that would not change at all.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Simon, so if let's assume we have the best, and I assume we have the best system for recounts, but let's assume that the other 49 states are not to the standard that we are, and I think we have the experience that that's in many times the case. So then we are delegating our election decision for president to those other states which may have different standards for election. They may have different standards for recounts. They may have different standards for ballot access. They may have different standards for absentee balloting. They may have different standards than we have. And those standards in another state, let's just assume, and I won't pick a state, but let's just say the worst state, whatever that is. Then our election, our votes would be dependent on determining the popular vote based on the procedures of that state. And that, I think, is the flaw with national popular vote. I think that that is where we delegate that responsibility to states that do not have the same standards. And earlier today we went through discussions about how to improve the standards. After Bush v. Gore, many of the states did that, but we have still had issues relating to elections in other states. And so I am hesitant to delegate our responsibility for elections to another state, to any of the other states. I think we can, and the Electoral College, I think, does have challenges. But there are other ways to solve that, and the straightforward one is with a constitutional amendment rather than the compact. I am very cautious of going down this road, delegating our authority to other states that may have different standards than we do. I do have one question on another topic. Representative Simon, if you would yield.
He will yield. Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Simon, to go to the question of the impact rather than the process. So the emails I get from my constituents say, well, presidential candidates don't pay attention to Minnesota, so we need to do this so that we'll be in play again. We'll get the attention from both parties or other parties to come forward to Minnesota to campaign. But if we are going to rely on popular vote, could the candidates just go to the population centers and go to California, go to Texas, go to Chicago, go to New York, and never go to North Dakota, South Dakota, rural areas of the country? Maybe they make a trip into Minneapolis. Can they just go to the high population areas to drive up the vote rather than having to hop around to put the 270 electoral votes together?
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Hansen, I'm glad you asked me that question. We all have, those of us who support this and think it's a thoughtful, long-standing approach, we have different reasons for supporting it. I've been very open with people that the rationale that most attracts me is fundamental fairness. Looking that 8-year-old Iraqi boy or the 11-year-old Afghan girl in the eye and trying to explain to them the apparent inconsistency between what we're trying to export and what we do at home. So that, to me, is the most compelling. Much further down on the list, for me personally, is this idea of getting more attention for Minnesota. I know there are those in the room who are for it for that reason. To me, I'm an American first and a Minnesotan second. And whether or not Minnesota gets a few more campaign stops along the way isn't particularly relevant to me. I'm concerned about electing my President of the United States, whoever he or she may be, based on the fact that they're the top vote getter. So that's never been one of the compelling arguments for me personally, although for some in this room, I think it is a compelling argument. To your question of would candidates just fly to and spend time in the big population centers and not elsewhere? No. I would argue that that is often done now. And if large urban areas were really what dictated the outcomes of elections, then that would fail to explain why there are Republican governors of Michigan, of Pennsylvania, of Ohio. If it was all about turning out the vote in Cleveland and Akron, then Mr. Kasich would not be governor of Ohio. If it was all about getting the vote out in Detroit, then Mr. Snyder would not be the governor of Michigan, and on and on and on. So that happens not only on a micro level in the states, but in a macro level in the United States. And this is the proposal by which every vote will be equal. And candidates will be incentivized to campaign across the country. And so in my earlier example, a Democrat would want to go to Texas because there are millions of Democrats there, and a Republican would want to go to California because there are millions of Republicans there, and sometimes those Republicans and those Democrats are in rural areas or less populated areas. As long as I have the microphone, though, let me just address your last statement, Representative Hansen, which is a fair one and an intellectually honest one. And, you know, there are good arguments on both sides of this issue. You were talking about, if I can paraphrase you, Minnesota or other states being sort of held hostage by the imperfections in other state systems. I would argue that's what's happening right now, even more so. Because right now, as we saw in the year 2000, and I'm not casting blame on any particular political party, this was the product of bumbling by Democrats and bumbling by Republicans, you had the ridiculous, outdated, and now, thank God, illegal butterfly ballot system in Florida. And some members who have been to my office have seen that in my office I have kind of you might say, a strange or dorky artifact of American history. Some friends of mine purchased for me as a birthday gift a few years ago an actual Palm Beach County, Florida, year 2000 voting booth. It's in my office. You can go see it. And I don't care what party you are. You take a look at that butterfly ballot that they have there. Doesn't matter. It's no particular political party's fault. The presidential election of the year 2000 hinged on the state of Florida's goofy election system, which was the product of both bumbling by Republicans and their predecessors in the Democratic Party. Equal opportunity bumbling. And as a result, we were held hostage to the idiosyncrasies and oddities and, you might say, incompetence of the electoral system in Florida that year. So if there's any system by which Minnesota and all other states are held hostage to the odd or incompetent election systems of states, it's the current system, because even one state, as we saw in Florida, that gets it wrong or does something bad or screws something up can dictate the outcome. At least with a national popular vote system, it won't be, in all likelihood, mathematically, one state. You would have to have many states screwing up at the same time and possibly even in the same way for it to affect us. So in terms of states and their bad systems holding hostage the states like ours that have good systems, I would argue that the current system does that with more intensity and more regularity than any other system.
Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Representative Simon, I appreciate that you've thought through these issues. I think that if there's challenges now, and we've tried federally and at the state level in many states trying to resolve election challenges. So the federal government has acted and gave us incentives. We've acted, and we just acted this morning, earlier today again. But I think it is a big leap to go to a compact. I think that's a big leap to explain to our constituents how their vote matters different than over 200 years of history. It is different, and not that different is bad, and not that change isn't good. But I think it is a hard thing to explain, and I think it is a challenging thing to explain if we cast our votes and cast them based on an agreement rather than the constitutional method that's been provided right now. So I would encourage a no vote.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I agree this is an important issue. As stated and in handouts and everything, U.S. Constitution allows the state or provides that the states have the right to award the Electoral College votes. And frankly, those votes should be awarded by and as a result of Minnesota votes, not the votes of anyone outside our borders. And frankly, I take that as a key reason why I have issues. The other thing is, I watch some of the events, and maybe because I'm a little closer to Iowa, I hear some more early on. But I said, well, who has visited Minnesota in the last several presidential campaigns, and even during the primary season, etc.? President Obama, VP Biden, President Bush, VP Cheney, VP Gore, Senator Kerry, President Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Senator McCain, Senator Santorum, Representative Ron Paul, Governor Huckabee, Representative sorry, I have trouble with his name, but you get the point that I don't think we have been ignored to the extent that's been pushed. But the biggest thing the Electoral College does provide is a firewall to fraud. Justice Stevens of the United States Supreme Court, in the majority opinion, and he's not considered usually towards my view, but in Crawford v. Marion County Election Board, states that flagrant examples of fraud in parts of the country have been documented throughout the nation's history by respected historians and journalists, that occasional examples have surfaced in recent years. So the U.S. Supreme Court acknowledges that there has been fraud, and this is a firewall to prevent a state or multiple states' fraud from affecting the outcome of them all. You know, we've all heard of where deceased people have voted, other issues with voting. There have been documented cases where portions of major metropolitan areas have had 110% or more of all adults vote. I mean, that's an interesting trick. Looking through a little bit of research on the internet, the top 15 metropolitan areas have over half the population. And if you look at the results, and I look at results, there tends to be a much higher turnout percentage in metropolitan counties than non-metropolitan counties. So in fact, that misbalance is quite a bit larger. And, you know, I agree that there could be some changes. In fact, as soon as 799 was dropped, or first reading, and I saw it, I drafted something and had it as an amendment, decided not to drop it today. I've had enough amendments for a little while. And frankly, it was apportioning the Electoral College in Minnesota by congressional district, and the winner of the state gets the 2 Senate. You know, frankly, something like that I see as reasonable, or coming to something that Minnesota voters decide how we distribute them. Whatever rules we set up, and I'm okay to, you know, coming up with rules, even if I don't win, but those rules must depend upon who Minnesotans vote for and not anyone outside the state. And that's why I can't vote for this, and I'll vote no.
Representative Loeffler.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, many good points have been made in the discussion. I think what's really important is for us to remember that this is going to impact every voter and the power of their vote in a presidential election. And we all represent a wide variety of constituents, no matter what party we're from. And all of us have within our districts the people who have got the red and blue maps memorized, who can give you counts, who follow play by play every bit of the drama of a presidential campaign. But we all know that's a tiny minority of the people that we represent. We represent a lot of people that I tend to refer to as political light. They vote every 4 years for whatever reason. Maybe they're passionate and concerned about international policy and they really follow the federal level, but they're just not so interested about the state or the county or their city. Or they might be somebody who's working 2 jobs and they just don't have time to really focus on anything, but the presidential election is everywhere and everybody's talking about it, whether it's at the local coffee shop or the local watering hole. And they vote. They vote every 4 years and they pay attention to what the results are. And I would say that if you had 10 years ago asked people, what is a hanging chad? Almost no one in Minnesota would have any clue what you were talking about. But I bet you could go to those political light voters in your district and ask if they voted in that presidential election, do they know what a hanging chad is? I bet a fair number of them remember what that was. They might not remember the butterfly ballot, but it was some goofy thing about how to decide the presidential election you had to stare at a piece of paper and decide if the Chad was pushed through or not enough. And so they take their presidential politics pretty darn serious. If we were to enact this and Minnesota voters voted for candidate A, no matter which party, and we instead had our electors vote for candidate B, it would be really hard to explain, I think, to the average voter why their vote went somewhere else because of some multi-state compact that legislators thought was kind of interesting back in 2013, and as a result we kind of cut this deal with these other states. I'm not sure they'd be with us. An issue as important as this is ready when your average ordinary voter understands what it's about and is engaged in the conversation. And right now I feel like we're engaged in a conversation with the people who've got the map memorized in the red and the blue and can tell you about the most dramatic moments of the last campaign. And I just, you know, it has some intriguing concepts, but I just don't think it's ready, and I don't think the voters would want us to step forward with this at this time. So no offense to Representative Simon and his work, it's not ready with the public as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Representative Isaacson.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. Members, I truly did walk in today really having no idea where I was going to fall on this. And I've been thinking a lot about what different people said, and I'm cast with the inevitable choice of agreeing with Garofalo or Gruenhagen, two of my favorite representatives on the other side. And I have to say that I believe that Representative Garofalo is spot on about the problem we're dealing with here. Spot on. There is definitely a dysfunction occurring in the way we are electing the president today. However, I have to disagree with this as a solution, and I have a few reasons for saying this. Bottom line, at the end of the day, I cannot stomach the idea that we will have 10 electors vote in a way that's not consistent with the popular vote of Minnesota. I think that there's a problem, and I think we need to address it, and I really respect Representative Simon for bringing something forward and beginning this debate. But at the end of the day, I cannot be party to that. Even if I want to see us change, even if I wanted a popular vote to be enacted across the country, it would have to be done in such a way that we were not counting them by states any longer then. But in my mind, and the way the framers put together the Constitution and my own studying of that, I would have to say that it's quite clear that our state has a right to apportion those votes. And it's important to me that those votes reflect what Minnesota voted for. That's the fundamental problem I have with this solution. I don't disagree with the premise. I think something should be done. I like that someone's trying to do something about it. I don't disagree with any of that. But at the end of the day, the votes from Minnesota should be reflected when they're being tallied for president. And under the system that's being proposed, that is not the case, and I find that to be unacceptable. I will be a no vote. Thank you.
Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And as I've been listening to the debate, and Representative Simon, you bring up some great points, Representative Winkler and Representative Garofalo, and I've been really thinking about this. And one of the things that Representative Simon brought up was, what are we going to export? And so when I heard that, what are we going to export, I thought to myself, and I'm wondering if Representative Metsa would yield for a question.
Representative Metsa will yield. Representative Krisha.
Representative Metsa, I'm really going through this and thinking about this. Where's the iron range on this, and is there a carve-out?
Representative Metsa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Krisha. I can't speak for the entire range, but I know the younger half is carving itself out of a yes vote for this bill.
Representative Krisha.
And thank you, Representative Metsa. That's really what I needed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, on a lot of bills, we know how we're going to vote when we come in here. I suppose 99% of the time, the debate doesn't mean a whole lot. I think in this case it really does. I mean, I've vacillated several times in listening to people discussing this. I mean, frankly, I would favor apportionment of electoral votes based on congressional districts, but that's not what's before us today. I do want Minnesota to count. I don't want our role to continue to diminish. I've heard from people in my district, most of them seem to be in favor of this national popular vote. And then I look back in history, and it has been messy. I'm not going to deal with the recent past, but you go back to the election of 1824, where Andrew Jackson was the leader in the popular vote. No one had the required number, so they went to Congress. The House of Representatives picked John Quincy Adams. We see the election of 1876 when Rutherford B. Hayes ran against Samuel J. Tilden, and in that one, Tilden looked like he had won, and then 5 states miraculously changed their vote totals, and we have another winner. So our Electoral College has had some serious bumps over the years. And with those questions in mind, I'm basically still have a troubled mind over this issue. And then I see that Representative Drazkowski sends out a message that it's unconstitutional. So I have to think about that a little bit. And then I see the team of Liebling and Winkler, Representative Winkler saying that the Democrats, frankly, are favored by the current system, and then they're joined by Representative Gruenhagen, and I'm thinking something's wrong here. And so I'm back looking at the team of Simon and Garofalo and hoping that they can bridge the troubled waters of my mind and I can reach a conclusion.
Representative Freiberg.
I think a fair number of legislators support this bill, but it seems like the supporters have been a little quieter. I do support this and wanted to respond to a couple points that have been made. I was glad Representative Simon covered this because he did so more eloquently than I could. I heard a couple members say if this passes, we'll be bound by systems of other states, but as he pointed out, we are now. The 2000 election results hinged on the recount processes in Florida, which nobody can argue worked well. More generally, the system now magnifies the importance of other states. It seems like 1,000 swing voters in Ohio are the target of all the advertising in presidential elections and get all the attention, and Minnesota is ignored completely. I know that's not Representative Simon's main reason for supporting this bill, but that is an important reason for me. I've also heard that if we adopt this bill, the new system will be difficult to explain, and frankly, I don't find that very convincing. Under this system, the person with more votes becomes president. That's not very hard to explain. I think that's how a lot of people understand democracy. The technical details of the compact can seem complicated, but the underlying principle is you get more votes, you win. I actually think the idea of a compact is a pretty elegant way of respecting both the Constitution and the wishes of states. And have you ever tried to explain the Electoral College, our current system, to a group of elementary school students? I just think this is a good bill. I plan on voting for it, and I appreciate the work Representative Simon has put into it, bringing it forward. And I'm glad to agree with Representative Garofalo on an issue here, too, on occasion.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the author of the bill yield to a question, please?
He will. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Speaker Thiessen. Representative Simon, what's the status of this bill in the Senate?
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Representative Erickson. The status of the bill in the Senate is that it's still in committee.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will Representative Simon continue to yield?
He will. Representative Erickson.
Representative Simon, did this bill make deadline in the Senate? Because I see it sitting in rules. So would you comment on that?
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Representative Erickson. You're the second person who's asked me that question today about rules. The reason it's in rules in the Senate is because in the Senate, for some reason, their elections committee is really a subcommittee of rules. So when it says it's in rules, and that may be strange to us in here in the House, that's how they've structured it. It's there because it's in the elections committee, and we hope and expect that we'll have a hearing on this next year. Senator Rest is carrying the bill in the Senate.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Speaker Thiessen and Representative Simon. I think, members, that means the bill will not have action in the Senate till next year.
Representative Isaacson.
I have to respond. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to respond from Representative Freiberg, a comment that he made. As much as I respect and enjoy his camaraderie, the reality is you're right. In Florida, this idea we're held hostage by other states already exists. Again, I say there is clearly a problem that needs to be fixed. However, what Representative Simon's bill does is just changes who the hostage takers are. That's the only difference here. So it doesn't actually solve the problem. It just changes it to being a different problem, right? And my concern is that I want to see if we're going to fix this problem, let's go ahead and actually solve the problem to reach some sort of conclusion as a country that way. But I don't think I'm comfortable with the way it's set up. The second point I would make is that, as we all know, legally electors are allowed to vote however they want. And under the current system, rarely do we have what are called faithless electors, right? Because the winning side is choosing the electors. However, we open ourselves up for all kinds of problems down the road when the losing side in a state is choosing the electors. I think we're going to have some issues there, and it complicates the problem even further. So I'm very concerned that we should really take the time to look at this. We're not in a hurry right now. There is no need to vote for this right now, and we can take the time to really vet a proper solution. I don't believe this is one of them. Thank you.
Representative Simon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think what we who are for the bill promised we delivered, which is a very interesting floor discussion. And there are reasonable people on both sides of this, and there are reasonable arguments on both sides. But I come back to first principles. And that especially for Commander-in-Chief and leader of the free world, the world's greatest democracy, the #1 vote getter should win. And to some extent, we're sort of overanalyzing in that respect. That fundamental principle is certainly what animates me. There are other principles that animate other members here today, but it comes down to that. And if you agree with that general proposition, then there are a number of ways to go about it. One would be to just abolish the Electoral College, which would require a federal constitutional amendment. It's not likely to happen. It's been tried before in the 1970s. And there are reasons, as others already articulated, like Representative Garofalo, why we wouldn't want to do that. Why, as this bill does, we preserve the Electoral College, totally preserve it, don't change it. We just do what the framers said we've always had the right to do, which is decide for ourselves how to allocate those votes. So for those who think there's a problem and there might be some other solution, I'm not really sure what it is, short of a federal constitutional amendment. And we can reasonable people can disagree on that. I want to just briefly, though, respond to a couple of things that have been brought up today. And they're good points and they're fair points. In terms of mob rule, members, I don't think any of us would say that Minnesota has mob rule because the first place vote getter for governor in fact became governor, or that any of us who are seated here today were parties to mob rule because we were the first place vote getters in our districts. I don't think any of us would say that. The idea of a republic, as Representative Gruenhagen so artfully raised, has nothing to do with the method by which we elect people, and particularly elect the President of the United States. The idea of a republic, which we are and will be after this passes, hopefully, is an idea about the relationship between those who govern and the citizens that they govern. And in Minnesota and federally, we do and always will have a republic, meaning that we filter the public passions through elected representatives who are not bound by any opinion poll, who are not bound necessarily by the opinion on this or that issue, by their individual voters, but are sent to office to exercise their judgment, not just put their finger to the wind, although obviously public opinion plays a major role, as it should, in determinations. That's what a republic is. That's what we have, and that's what we always will have. So this bill doesn't undo that. In fact, I would argue that it augments and supports that. In terms of recounts, we've had some discussion today. I would much rather rely on 50 states to do the right thing than rely on one flawed state, such as Florida in 2000, to carry us across the finish line. And that's the system that we have right now. Members, in terms of timing, this bill has been thoroughly vetted over the years. Representative Pawlowski had a hearing on it a couple of years ago. Representative Pepin had a hearing on it last term in office. This has been a bill that has been around here for a long time. Many of you, I think all of you, fortunately or unfortunately, have gotten this great big book sent to you where weeks or months in advance. I don't pretend that everyone's gone through that book in detail. I haven't gone through that book in terms of every page. But the point is that the resources have been here. This has been a bill that has been around for a very long time. I don't think anyone can necessarily claim surprise or that this is new or novel. And it's been the product of a thoughtful discussion nationally and in the state for a great number of years. In terms of when to do this, members, I've always said, and I think a great many people agree nationally, that the best time to implement something like this is in year one of the 4-year presidential cycle. We're in year one in 2013, having just gone through the 2012 election. Why? Because the closer you get to an election and a presidential election, the more accusations there will be or suspicions there will be that one or another legislator or political party is somehow trying to game the system for their preferred candidate. Right now, we don't know who the nominees are going to be for the Democratic or Republican parties, and we don't know what the dynamic will be in that election. And I don't think anyone could accuse me and the other list of bipartisan supporters here today of trying to somehow game the system for our candidate. No, this is really about making sure that America stays true to its fundamental principles. And as you've seen, no doubt, by this book that has been distributed to everyone, if you've gone to the website, you've seen there is a long list of hundreds, even thousands of people from around the country, prominent Democrats, prominent Republicans, and others who support this, people of great depth, people of great ability, people of great sincerity. That doesn't mean it's right, of course, but I hope it's a demonstration that this is no quick, fly-by-night idea. This has been in the making for many, many years, and there are a lot of very thoughtful people who have given this a lot of thought. There are thoughtful people in here today who are going to vote yes, and thoughtful people who are going to vote no, so I concede that. But I think ultimately it comes down to those fundamental principles, and the principles that really piqued my interest way back in 1992 in your mama's restaurant in Little Rock, Arkansas. The fact that in the United States of America, the commander-in-chief should be the person who got the most votes, not second place, not third place, and that fundamental principle can be accomplished in a flexible and I think very elegant way by entering into the state compact that maintains our flexibility to leave it at any time, and that in the end secures that promise of American democracy. Number one vote getter wins the election, just as we do for our offices, for governor, for U.S. Senate, or any others. And members, thanks for your time today. I know it's a busy time in session. This is a serious issue that a number of us have been working on for a long time, and I ask respectfully for your support for national popular vote.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 62 ayes and 71 nays, the bill does not prevail. Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seriously? Representative Murphy.
I'd like to make a motion to reconsider the vote, please.
Representative Murphy moves to reconsider the vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed no. No. Motion prevails.
And
Representative
Mr. Speaker, I would like to re-refer the House file to the Rules Committee, please.
Representative Murphy moves that the bill be re-referred to the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration. All in favor of that motion say aye. Aye. All opposed no. Motion prevails. The next bill on the calendar for the day is Senate File 523.
Senate File 523 on the calendar for the day, the second engrossment, an act relating to employment.
I didn't want to go down.
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate File 523. You first. It's called Ban the Box. Members, over the last decades, our criminal justice system has tightened down the penalties and has put more people in jail, charged and arrested. And those people, when they have served their time, paid their dues to society, and come out, on every job application, there is a box that they have to check if there is an arrest or a charge or a conviction. Unfortunately, all those applications either get deleted off the computer or thrown into the trash bin, most times. And if we're going to successfully allow these people to come back into society, because remember, the best program we can do is a job for someone. We need to at least allow them the ability to talk to the HR person and explain. Sir, I'm 45 years old. I made a mistake when I was 20. I am not that person any longer. I have a family. I've finished college. I've done this. I've worked 20 years someplace and had a successful career. We are just trying with this bill to allow that to happen. I'll explain the bill and then stand for questions. But I do, and then I'll say, when we go to passage, I will tell you how I feel. This bill has really moved me and touched me. I am kind of surprised by that because I've been here 15 years and I don't get many bills that move you or touch you. Section 1 is primarily comfort language. It allows for the Department of Corrections or any state agency to continue to put that check on the front of the application if you are required to have a clean record. So a corrections officer, a police officer, state patrol person, working with vulnerable adults. Section 2 is liability protection, where it comes in on line 2.4. The actions are based solely upon the employer's compliance with Section 364.021. Section 3 deals with a few things. It again addresses liability protection. Section 3. I better read that one. Section 3 allows for when you have somebody like a day laborer or temp services to continue to makes the arrangements for those people to make their application without the box. Child care, it allows for, this section does not apply, or this law does not apply to someone doing child care or caretaking in an apartment building or nursing homes. In section 3, it also exempts or allows for an employer to put on the front of the application, if you have a criminal record, you will not be hired, flat out as a policy. Because obviously if you have to deal with vulnerable adults or child care, you don't want somebody wasting their time or your time. Section 4 is the penalties and is the protection from civil liability. We did not want, in our conversations with the with the Chamber of Commerce, both St. Paul, Minneapolis, and employers, they did not want to have, if they had made a mistake, they did not want to have someone sue them. This is the anti-lawyer provision, so I hope I don't offend the lawyers in the crowd here. So what we're going to do is we're putting it in the Human Rights Division, so it cannot go to court. And what this does in Section 4, it waits till 2015. It's a small penalty, and it exempts that first violation, gives you a written warning. The second one gives you 30 days to fix your problem, and then it fines you. So really, you've got 2 shots at that apple to get it fixed. Then on page 3, we had some questions about what size of an employer we were dealing with here. So we broke it down into a number of sizes for the employers. And I need to read this to get it correct. For employers that employ less than 10, you have up to $100 for each violation, not to exceed $100 in a month. For employers that employ 11 to 20 persons, the penalty up to, and remember that's up to, so they don't have a $500 fine, it could be a $100 fine for each violation, not to exceed 500 in a calendar year or calendar month, and so on to over 20 employees. Section 5 is mostly for public employment, and there again it makes those exemptions for state patrol, bus driver, child care, working with vulnerable adults. And then on the last page, the new language on 4.8, this chapter does not supersede a requirement under the law to conduct a criminal background check or consider criminal history and records in hiring for particular employment. So members, this is really the second chance for a lot of the men and women that have made a mistake. But it doesn't say to an employer, you cannot ask. What it says to an employer, check the qualifications and then talk to the person. Members, this is a good bill. I know so many people in my life, and I'm sure everyone else on this House floor knows people who have made mistakes. And it's one of the things that we all love to see is someone who has made a mistake get a second chance and do well. This does that with conditions. Members, I'll stand for questions.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, Senate File 523.
Third reading. Discussion of the bill. Representative Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, if you thought the last bill had made some strange alliances, I stand in favor of this bill. My faith tradition informs me that people deserve second chances, and I only use that as a segue to being a longtime supporter of Prison Fellowship Ministries. In fact, my middle daughter, who's a pastor, also worked at Prison Fellowships Ministries, and what I've known for many, many years is as men and women exit prison, unless there is some hope that they'll be able to get back and be productive citizens of society, and with that earn a wage, be able to support their loved ones, that the recidivism rate of these individuals is extremely high. Would seem at least that this is a bill that restricts the rights of business. I don't approach it in that way. In fact, I made sure that I did talk to the chamber before the vote and let them know, in fact, that I would be voting for it. But members, this is an important bill, and one that I believe could give literally thousands of individuals, Minnesotans, new hope that they too can return to society. Thank you.
Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you, Representative Mahoney, for bringing forth this bill. I, too, believe it's a very important bill. You know, people do make mistakes in their lives. And there's a huge population that's out there that are striving to get a job, that have had problems in their lives, that have felonies on their records. And what this bill does is it gives them a chance to get before that person that is responsible for hiring. Now, in my life, I've hired hundreds of people, and what this bill does is it gets these people, these individuals, in front of those human resource people, those hiring people, so that they can discuss what has transpired in their lives. And you can see these people, and you can hear their stories, and they can explain what has happened. So many of these people have got tremendous qualifications, and what they're looking for is a chance, an opening, and they know that they have had a problem, that they've committed an offense. And what this is doing is it's giving them hope.
He hasn't yet.
And in my business, I've hired a lot of felons.
Pardon me?
And some of the very best supervisors and the best workers that are out there are people that have gotten that second chance. And Representative Mahoney, I think this is a great bill. I support it wholeheartedly. I ask for a green vote on this, members.
Representative Dean.
Mr. Speaker, members, and Representative Mahoney, I want to thank you for bringing this bill to us today. The past several years I've been working on this issue. Probably one of the biggest obstacles that folks face when they redeem their lives and when they change who they were in their past is getting a job. And if they can't get a job, it impacts all of us. This bill is not only good from a human rights point of view, this is a good public safety bill. Because if these individuals are able to be employed and be productive members, they will flourish, and that will help us in the long run. When they apply for jobs and have to check that box, they know that they're probably not getting that job. This will allow them the opportunity to actually get an interview, to talk about what they did in their past. I mean, I could ask all of us to raise our hands. How many of us did things in our past that if we would have been caught, this might apply to us? So I won't ask that. It's a good bill, and I want to quote FDR when he said that the best social service program in the world is a job. This is a great bill, and I encourage all members to vote green on this particular bill. Thank you.
Representative Cornish.
Mr. Speaker and members, real short. My colleagues have already covered the points I was going to. I just would also like to lend my support to the bill. It's a good bill. Thank you, Representative Mahoney.
Representative Detmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would the author yield to a question?
He will yield, yes. Representative Detmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Mahoney, does this just deal with private companies? What about government state employees, government jobs.
Representative Mahoney.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Detmer, yes, this deals with private employers because the state has already done this back in 2009. It was passed and Governor Pawlenty signed it. It's been the policy of the state for, I guess it's 4 years or 5 years now, 2009. So yes, it just deals with private employers.
Representative Detmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what I understand that what you just said is that on the government, when you apply for a government job, there's no box that you have to check?
He will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Detmer, there is not supposed to be a box when you go for a civil service job in that fashion. Now, if you're applying to be for a job that we, by statute, have required a background check, then you're still allowed to put that box on the front of the application, whether it's state or in state or city or county. But on most all of the jobs by the state, no, you don't. That box is not supposed to be on the application.
Representative Detmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wondering if the author would yield.
He will yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Mahoney, can you tell us how, obviously we are growing government of the Department of Human Rights with this bill. We're going to need Department of Human Rights police to go out and inspect private businesses throughout Minnesota, or at least follow up on complaints. Can you tell us how we're going to pay for this? Is there a fiscal note, or how do you pay for this bill?
Representative Mahoney.
Representative Drazkowski, we are not doing human rights police. It will answer to complaints. They do that now. They've said that they can absorb this. There's no fiscal note that I've seen or been requested by either side. So I don't see a fiscal cost to this. And it is done in the Human Rights Division to avoid civil court, so that if someone finds a box on an application, you can't drag a private employer into the courts. You have to go in front of the Human Rights Division. And there are no judges there. There's just a simple fine.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Mahoney. Well, members, I share some of the sentiments that were shared earlier about helping folks who have made decisions in the past that find them in positions that prohibit their ability to get employed. I think we need to do all we can. But this is the wrong solution. This is growing government and inserting government into our private employers and their ability to carry forward with the autonomy that the private people of Minnesota, free people, the once free people of Minnesota, and their ability to develop, grow, and bring their businesses to flourish in ways that they best see fit to fit their business model, their ideas, and other endeavors. Members, what this does is it adds to our statutes, and Representative Mahoney, I read the bill, and that's how I read it too, that currently public employers are generally prohibited, with a couple of exceptions, of putting the box on their form. And members, what this does is says, well, now that's good enough for government employers. We're going to tell private employers throughout Minnesota. I wonder where the Chamber of Commerce is, members, on this bill. Why don't we have a statement from them here on behalf of business owners in Minnesota saying, we don't need government coming in and telling us how to operate our business? Because, members, that's what this bill does. It tells employers in Minnesota, every private employer in Minnesota, you start a job or your neighbor starts a job in Minnesota, this law is going to apply to them. And it's going to tell them that if they want to ask about the criminal background of a potential employee of their business, that they cannot ask that on the initial round of applications. And if they do, they're subject to a fine. Up to $500 in one case, and up to, and I'm reading here, line 3.8 of the bill, for employers that employ more than 20 persons at one or more sites in this state, the penalty is up to $500 for each violation, not to exceed $2,000 in a calendar month. So per calendar month, the Department of Human Rights can come out and issue them a fine for asking about the criminal background of somebody who is going to employ or is applying for employment in their private business. Members, we do need to find ways to help folks who made poor decisions in the past to get them employed. And I heard it said by another member that the best answer is a job, and I agree with that 100%. But members, this is the wrong solution. We need to find a better approach that does not grow government, that does not insert it into the business decisions in the private sector. Encourage your red vote on this bill. Thank you, members.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. Representative Mahoney, I did jail ministry for 13 years, okay, so I definitely believe in a second chance and sometimes a third chance. My wife gives me more than one chance in most cases, okay, and I appreciate that. What I was going to say, though, I do share some of the concerns Representative Drazkowski brought forward. And, okay, if I'm an employer, how do I find out? I mean, I just think they should be able to find out if you have a felony and what type, or is that information ever being able to disclose? I was looking at your bill, but I can't, maybe I'm missing something, but if you would comment on that. Once the application's filled out, the person comes in for the interview, can I ask them if they have a felony? And I know some of our felonies are marginal, you know, in terms of being classified as a felony. So could you just, you know, explain a little bit more on that area? Thank you,
Representative Mahoney will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Gruenhagen. Representative Gruenhagen, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce has been deeply involved in the negotiations on this, and they have taken a neutral position for the last number of years as this has moved forward, and they chose to stay that way. But many accommodations were made to them in this particular bill, and they have no opposition. They just are staying neutral. So, to your question about when you can find out, I make the you know, I did something wrong in my youth, and 20 years later, I'm applying for a job, and you know, I fill out the application, and they're looking for a pipe fitter down at the refinery. As soon as they say go on down to the refinery and sign in, that's when that refinery can ask Tim Mahoney, do you have any criminal conviction? Do you have an arrest? Do you have a felony against you? Have you been in prison? At that time, as soon as you show up, or when they pick up the phone and say, Tim, we want you to come down to the refinery to go to work, but by the way, do you have any of this? Do you have a criminal conviction? Do you have an arrest or anything else? At that point, they can ask. So long as they have looked at the application, said, you know, you're a healthy adult male that has the right training and the right background to do this particular job, and they make the offer, then they can ask at that particular time.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Mahoney, thank you for that response. But, okay, let's say they find that out at that point. Can they decide that based on the job classification that you're in, that because of the felony background, and I'm not so worried about 20 years ago, I don't think most employers will be, okay, and I'm an employer myself, okay, I don't, you know, but if something happened the last 4 or 5 years and I suddenly find out about it and I think it might compromise that person's ability to work with other people in that setting based on that felony conviction, can I make can I decide, well, you know what, I don't think this is going to work out at that time? Or what's the consequence? Is there a consequence to the employer if once he finds out and he wants to make a change, does he have the freedom to do that, or is he pretty much locked in at that point?
Representative Mahoney will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Gruhagen. I think there are two questions there. One question was, at what point can they ask and act upon do you have any of this in your past? And I think the other one was, and I'm not sure you were intending to make this question, but 4 years after hiring, circumstances change. Minnesota's an at-will employer state, so if circumstances changes, you can certainly let him or her go. But after they have, they find out after they have you've made the application. They've gone through the application. They say, this looks like a good idea. You look like a good fit for this particular job. Come on in. On the phone. They're on the phone calling you. You look like a good fit. Please come in. But by the way, we do a criminal background check. Do you have any felonies in your background? At that moment, they can ask when they make that phone call or when you show up on the job site or whatever. So no, there is no restriction to finding that out. They can find that out. They just can't do it on that initial request.
Representative Gruenhagen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Mahoney. Can they decide at that point when they find it out that they might have to assign him to a different job or he's not a fit? That's really the question. When they find that information out and they decide he can't be in that setting, can they make a change to his job assignment and maybe even say, you know what, this isn't going to work out, based on your past history and what the felony is for?
Representative Mahoney will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Mr. Speaker, yes, they can. They can do that. At that particular point, when they've looked at it and they made the initial contact, and you say, yes, I have a felony in my past or I've been arrested, they can say, well, we're sorry, we can't hire you then, and then it's all done. And there's no recourse for that applicant unless there's some other problems. But under this law, there would be no recourse for that applicant to go after someone for that.
Representative Mullery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, I remember talking to Jerry Madden at dinner one night about these issues on reentry. He's the long-term chair of the Public Safety Commission in the Texas legislature, and many consider him to be the most arch-conservative Republican in the Texas legislature. And as he explained it, you can come at this from two different viewpoints, either social justice or the way he came at it was from fiscal responsibility. And Texas is one of the leading states in the country on putting money into the whole issue of reentry programs, which includes something like this. This is probably the least costly of anything we can do, and it's about time this legislature wakes up and the state and starts putting money into this, because in the long run, the reentry programs are an incredible benefit to the state. It lessens the unemployment. It gets people out there paying taxes. It cuts down on the social service money. It cuts down on the cost to society of crime. It's just an incredible winner, and it's about time that a leading state on most issues starts stepping up to the plate on this and quit watching the other states go by us.
Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Mahoney, I'd like to have you yield for a question, but first of all, I'd like to have you bear with me on a little incident that I became aware of, and I'd like to ask you the question. I take it that this gets away from that box if you can ask them if you've been involved in a felony in the last 7 years. Is that correct?
Representative Mahoney will yield. Representative Mahoney.
Yes.
Representative Howe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Mahoney, here's the issue. I've got a friend of mine that used to work for the Department of Corrections. And in that, he quit there and he started working for a retailer. Well, he was in this retail store, and a gentleman comes up and says, "Hi, I haven't seen you for a while," and it turned out to be one of his former inmates. And he said, "Well, what are you doing here?" Well, he worked at this retailer. So he went up to the head office and he said, "You realize you got so-and-so working down there?" Well, they said, "Yeah, we just hired him." Well, he just got out of prison. He couldn't have. They looked at his he must have lied on his application. Sure enough, he checked that he hadn't committed a felony in the last 7 years. Well, he couldn't commit a felony in the last 7 years because he'd been in prison for 17 for killing a policeman. So, I guess I think that I feel that they're going to have to either have a secondary application, because I think when they ask them that question, they really need to have that in writing that they haven't committed any felonies in their lifetime, so they can get back to that. Otherwise, they have nothing really concrete to let the person go. But I think that that's a big concern of mine, that they're either going to have a secondary application process to have it actually in writing that they were factual in their writing. Would that be correct, Representative Mahoney, if you'd stand for another question?
He will yield. Representative Mahoney.
I don't even think that they would need that underneath this bill, because if they are doing a criminal background, this does not prevent them from doing a criminal background check at any time. At any time. So they could do, if you or I went into Target or Menards or wherever and filled out an application and there was no box on there, before they made the offer or after they made the offer to hire us, they could do the background check. And in the case of this man, they would have found that he was in prison for the last 17 years. For you and I, they would have found that we were angels from the day we were born. But no, it would not require a secondary application. They would be able to do a background check at any time.
Seeing no further discussion on the bill, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 107 ayes and 26 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 316. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 316, the First Engrossment Act relating to transportation.
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House File 316 is one of those bills that you don't really get attached to. It doesn't really move you like the last bill did. This is a bill from the Department of Drivers and Vehicle Services and the auto. What are they? The auto dealers. Right now we have something called a title transfer fee, and when you auction off a car, you're transferring the title. When you auction the car, then you sell it to a dealership. The dealership sells it to the next one down the street, typically with used cars. That starts to get lagged out behind you. hard to keep track of for the auto dealers and for the Department of Vehicle Services. So they got together and came up with a new way to do this. They got rid of the, they are eliminating the title transfer fee, which covers about 20-25% of the sales, and increasing the title fee, the title transfer fee and title fee. So it goes from, the title fee goes from $7.25 to $8.25, and then eliminates the title filing fee, the title transfer fee of $6.50. Once the department, and it does not go into effect until January 1 of 2017, because the Department of Vehicle Services will not have its technology up to date to handle this particular piece. Then they split that $8.25 between well, that should cover both of them in any event. I don't know where, I don't have it here in front of me where it splits it, but that should cover the transferring of the title and the title fee. Members, very big, boring bill.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 316.
Third reading. Any discussion of the bill? Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Mahoney yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Speaker Thiessen. Representative Mahoney, I have several dealers in my district who purchase cars, sometimes those that are damaged from flood or otherwise. And what they tell me is that it's so burdensome for them to go through and get all these title transfers. So can you tell me to what extent your provision here might improve that or make it easier so that once these vehicles have been restored, my dealers then don't have to be in constant communication or waiting, which is what I've found out, for the titles to be returned to them or confirmed by them, and for all these fees to be paid, because there are numerous fees. So if you could help me on that, I would appreciate it. I do like your bill a lot, but I hope it helps these.
Representative Mahoney.
Well, Representative Eric, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Erickson, none of us are bureaucrats here, so it gets a little hard to explain some of this stuff. What we're doing is we're eliminating the title transfer fee, which is the issue that your dealers or your small dealers up in your neck of the woods are having, because they have to track where that thing was bought and sold. And sometimes the horror story that I had heard was somebody, a vehicle had been bought and sold 12 times in less than a couple weeks. And then when it was actually sold, they had to go back to the person they sold it to and say, well, you really owe us this 12 times the $7.50 or whatever it is. And that was not well received. So what we're doing here is we're getting rid of the title, the transfer fee, the title transfer fee, which is the issue for your fellas, and then increasing the title fee, $1. So that should eliminate a whole bunch of that particular paperwork. And they should only have to do it once.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Speaker Thiessen, and thank you, Representative Mahoney. And I hope that members were listening, because I know I'm not the only one who's had these situations occur. And I worked very closely with the department last year and the year before to try to resolve some of these issues. So I hope that what you've brought forth here in this title transfer change that's going to solve some of the dilemma, because members, in our small communities, we have lots of auto dealers who buy cars at auctions, or, as I said earlier, perhaps flood damaged vehicles, restore them, sell them, and they're really in demand. And it's a great business to have in rural Minnesota. So thank you, Representative Mahoney.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Mahoney yield?
He will. Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Mahoney, what will this do for the cost of to an average consumer who buys a new car, in terms of their total vehicle transfer fees?
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Drazkowski. Well, there's 4 or 5 common fees for a vehicle transfer. So when you're transferring the fee, the vehicle from the dealer to the typical consumer, you're going to get rid of a $6.50 fee. And you're going to increase another one for $1. So it should actually be a win for your average typical consumer. And then they're going to, and once the computer systems are able to handle the software that this will need to be done, the department will be splitting the money, kind of trying to cover both of these particular issues. And it will save money for the typical consumer.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Mahoney. I'm kind of puzzled because the fiscal note tells us that there's going to be an additional, in 2017, additional $16,000 in revenue to the general fund and another $33,000 to the vehicle services operating account. It appears that we're going to be collecting more money from Minnesotans with this bill, is what I'm gathering. I don't know, maybe it's used car owners or something that are paying more. Somebody's paying more, and I don't know who it is, but I would have liked to have seen the cleanup part of the bill. I appreciate that, making it easier for folks. But again, we're continuing to increase fees on Minnesotans with this bill, so I'll be voting no. But I wonder, we had a transportation bill that went through here, a finance bill that increased the general fund portion of the bill by 64%, and I kind of wonder where all those dollars went and what they're being used for. They certainly should have been used for a common sense piece like this. You've got some very good common sense restructuring built into it. I just would have liked to seen the fees be at the same level. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, will Representative Mahoney yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Johnson.
Representative Mahoney, I'm wondering, is it just the fees that are going away, or is it the registration from dealership to dealership as well that will not be done anymore?
Representative Mahoney.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, as I understand it, the title transfer fee is going away. But you will still have to transfer the title. It'll now be done underneath the title fee, which is, it seems kind of silly that they had 2 of them that apparently would have done the same thing. So what they're doing is eliminating the one of them and doing everything underneath the other.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, will Representative Mahoney yield to another question?
He will yield. Representative Johnson.
So, Representative Mahoney, so my understanding, once the vehicle is sold to the final consumer, is that when the transfer fees and all that paperwork will be taken care of?
Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is my understanding.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, being in law enforcement, I have a problem with this. I've had more than one time where I've run across a vehicle parked in somebody's yard or smashed into their garage. We run the plate and it comes back to a dealership. I've had it taken 15 days to track down the 3rd or 4th dealership that the vehicle has been gone to because they're not transferring now. But this allows them not to do the dealership to dealership transfer. It's going to make it a lot harder for law enforcement to find these cars, and it's going to raise the rates of cars, the cost of cars to consumers, because the insurance premiums for these dealerships is going to go up because they're just going to lose the cars.
Representative Beard.
Mr. Speaker, members, I've heard some of the discussion here. I'm sorry I missed the bill introduction, but this came to Transportation Finance, and we had some of these days same discussions. Members, to be clear, you are voting for a fee increase. The final title transfer is going from 6 1/4 to 8 1/4. So I want you to know that. However, by passing the bill, you're eliminating multiple title transfers in the middle of the transaction while dealerships are buying, selling, and trading cars among themselves, which happens very regularly. In Shakopee, one of the industries I neglected to mention last night is the North Star Auto Auction. Over in Maple Grove, they have, I think it's the Minnesota Auto Auction, where they move cars back and forth frequently because if cars don't turn quickly, they're moving them back and forth on the wholesale level. That cost frequently just gets added into the price of the car and passed on to the consumer. So the fiscal note you're looking at here can't reflect that. There's no way the people who work for the agencies can understand what the savings would actually be. All they can actually look at is, oh, by the way, the fee's going up $2, and it adds about $33,000 a year to the vehicle services account. And frankly, I got to tell you, I have no idea where they come up, Representative Mahoney, with the general fund amount, because usually all this money is dedicated to the Department of Vehicle Services. And in that case, it will help that goofy, I'm going to bring myself to say this on the floor, MNLARS fee actually blink off faster. So to be clear, yes, you're going to vote for an increase. Yes, it will blink off the MNLARS thing faster, as I understand the bill. And yes, there are things that the agency cannot account for, and that there's 2 or 3 steps in the middle that will go away that consumers will no longer pay for. I think this is a good vote. You can probably vote green on the bill.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the bill. The clerk will close the roll. There being 110 ayes and 23 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1510. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 1510, the first engrossment and act relating to Hennepin County.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, this is the bill a week or so ago we brought up on the floor, and we found it was late at night after a long discussion on another tiny little bill that we were on for a long time. But there were some questions that came up, and I wasn't able to get the answers, so we referred it back to rules. And what this bill does is it basically allows Hennepin County, they want to adopt the design build rules that the state of Minnesota follows with MnDOT. And all they're doing is transferring MnDOT's language into the Hennepin County statute. The couple of questions that came up on the floor on this the other night was, one was about data practices. And if you look at the bill, the way it's drafted, the first part of the bill, 383B.158, well, if they just continued the rest of the statute, it says in there that they're subject to Chapter 13. So the data practices piece is in the statute already, so it is covered by that. The other question had to do with this on the line 3.34, where there was about 0 to 5 people could pick from 0 to 5, or 1 to 5 people, or bidders, and that's the same exact language as in the MnDOT statute of the bill. So they're just adopting the MnDOT practices. Hennepin County had their own design build practices, and to make it easier for contractors to cut down on red tape. They're trying to adopt the MnDOT statutes so that they makes it easier for our contractors when they're bidding on this work, because the same contractors that bid on MnDOT work in the metro area bid on the Hennepin County work. And there was another question I was asked afterwards about why don't we just in the Hennepin County statute reference the MnDOT statutes. Well, I think Hennepin County would love that, because instead of the Hennepin County commissioners being the ones making the decision, it would be MnDOT, but they would also have all the costs, so it would save Hennepin County money. And my good friend Representative Beard would not like that, because we'd be taking gas tax dollars to give it to Hennepin County. So that's why we're doing this. There's like 31 places in the bill that where in the MnDOT part of the statute it references MnDOT and their selection process, where this references Hennepin County, the Hennepin County Board, and the Hennepin County Design Practices or the Design Selection Committee. So that's what the bill does. It's a good bill. Please vote green.
There are no amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1510.
Third reading. Seeing no further discussion on the bill, the clerk will take the roll. Clerk will close the roll. There being 133 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is passed and its title agreed to. The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1136. The clerk will report the bill.
House File 1136, first engrossment, an act relating to health.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, this bill comes to you from the Board of Pharmacy. It's about a very important health issue. In October of last year, a specialty pharmacy located in Massachusetts shipped about 17,000 doses of an injectable drug to physicians and pharmacies and hospitals in 23 different states. Unfortunately, that product was contaminated with a deadly fungus. Over 700 people, including 11 Minnesotans, have developed severe fungal infections. And although no deaths have occurred in Minnesota, over 50 people have died from this nationwide. The fungus can remain dormant in the body for many years, so people who are exposed remain at risk for infections even if they don't have one yet. So our Board of Pharmacy is responding to that outbreak with this bill to help this keep from happening again. What it does is strengthen the licensing requirements for all facilities that are licensed by the Board of Pharmacy. A lot of these facilities are located in other states and they ship drugs into Minnesota. They are already licensed by the board. But House File 1136 will require these facilities to prove they are licensed or registered also in the state in which they're located, and for manufacturers to also prove that they are registered by the Food and Drug Administration. So out-of-state facilities that could have shipped drugs into Minnesota without having been inspected will now have to provide a copy of an inspection report that is within 24 months or agree to be inspected by an authorized agent of the Board of Pharmacy. And they'll have to correct any deficiencies. So this is a very important bill that is meant to protect Minnesota consumers who, when they buy a pharmaceutical product, have every reason to expect, at the very least, that it's not contaminated by some infectious agent. And that is what this bill aims to do. So there is no known opposition, at least I don't know of any opposition to the bill. It's been worked on by many different groups to try to come to agreement on the language. And Mr. Speaker, I do have a couple of amendments.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Liebling moving to amend House File 1136. The first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A1.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this is the result of some last-minute concern by a drug wholesaler, and it's basically just comfort language. I've been assured by the Board of Pharmacy that this does not weaken the bill. I ask for your support.
Representative Abler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members, and I'll speak to the amendments and to the bill. This is a really good project. This is a problem that needed to be solved, and kudos to Representative Liebling for working on this. I don't know of any opposition. Either of the amendments are technical and valuable, and I urge people to vote yes, and then to vote yes for the bill, and then we can solve this problem, and people don't have to die from fungal infections in Minnesota. So thank you.
Seeing no further, Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to, being personally affected by this, I would like to thank Representative Liebling for this. It's very scary when you've gotten an injection of a drug and then you find out later that it may be contaminated because the company wasn't properly licensed. So thanks for working on this, Representative Liebling. I will be voting for it.
On the amendment, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Liebling moving to amend House File 1136 to first engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded 569.
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this one's truly technical. It was some changes that were spotted by the reviser. It simply inserts the word drug before manufacturer where it occurs, just to clarify that we're talking about drug manufacturers.
Any further discussion to that amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File 1136 as amended.
Third reading. Any discussion to the bill? Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the author would yield to a question.
She will yield. Representative Anderson.
Representative Liebling, I got to tell you, before this session, I was not familiar with compounded medicine at all, but this was a learning experience for me because I had a constituent of mine that contacted me about this issue. And I'm just worried. One of the concerns that they mentioned is the individual prescription rule that's in here really interrupts their ability to have compounded medicines available and so forth. And I'm wondering, did you change that at all to accommodate some of those concerns at all, or can you help me out?
Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Anderson, for that question. This is why we had quite a bit of discussion among different parties. One of the issues was indeed that one, and everybody's comfortable now. I think ophthalmologists were one group where they do a certain amount of mixing of medications in their facilities for individual patients, and that is all accommodated in the bill, so this should not interrupt their ability to do that.
Representative Anderson.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling. It was an ophthalmologist that had contacted me, and he mentioned a disease. I am not going to be able to say it properly. It's endophthalmitis, and it's a blinding eye condition, and if you don't have treatment right away, it will lead to, it'll be blind. You'll become blind, and so you're telling me that this has been corrected, everybody's on board, and it's okay.
Representative Liebling will yield. Representative Liebling.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, absolutely. We worked really hard, and the Board of Pharmacy worked really hard to be able to improve safety, especially with these out-of-state pharmacies, without disrupting the careful practitioners who already practice in our state, and that's why it took quite a bit of time, even though the issue is really simple and one that everybody will pretty much agree with. The technical parts of it were a little challenging, but I believe that everybody is happy, and those groups that do what you're discussing are comfortable with the bill.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. Just one last question. Will they have to order the treatment from a compounding pharmacy in advance, or will they be able to have it on site?
Representative Liebling will yield. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Anderson, the bill doesn't change that. So I think what it does is it just exempts them from a definition that would have caused them to take on more burdens. So, but I don't think, it doesn't change their current practice, as far as I know.
Seeing no further discussion on the bill, the clerk will take the roll. clerk will close the roll. There being 133 ayes and 1 nay, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to. Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, Murphy E. for the Committee on Rules, pursuant to Rule 121 and 3.33 designates the following bills to be placed on the calendar for Friday, May 10th, 2013. Senate file numbers 1564 and 1234, House file numbers 1792, Senate file numbers 340 and 17, House file number 694, Senate file number 250, House file number 683, Senate file numbers 683, and House file number 1183.
Motions and resolutions. Copies of the non-controversial motions and resolutions are online and at the front desk. If there is no objection, we'll take action on those motions first. Hearing no objection, those motions prevail. Announcements. Representative Doubt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. GOP members will caucus in our caucus room immediately following session.
Representative Murphy. M.
The State Government Conference Committee will meet 15 minutes after the Senate adjourns.
Representative Murphy. E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. DFL members, we will not caucus tonight in room 217. Thank you for that. And Mr. Speaker, I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until noon, Thursday, May 9th, 2013.
Representative Murphy moves that when the House adjourns today, it will adjourn until noon, Thursday, May 9th, 2013. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. Representative Murphy.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Murphy moves that the House do now adjourn. All in favor say aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. The House stands adjourned until Thursday, May 9th, 2013 at noon, 12 noon.